How did Mesopotamia, the cradle of history, fall? Welcome to Collapse, where history comes alive and every video immerses you in the fate of those who shaped the world. Today, prepare to traverse the sands of time to the banks of the great rivers where it all began. Between the Tigris and the Euphrates, Mesopotamia rose as the beating heart of the ancient world. Here were born the first cities, the first laws, writing, empires, and stone-eyed gods. Babylon, Uruk, Akkad, Nineveh. So many names that resonate as pillars of our collective memory. But one day, the palaces emptied, the temples collapsed, and the rivers stopped nourishing the dreams of men. What cataclysm caused the fall of this foundational land? But before embarking on a new adventure, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to not miss anything. Thank you and have a good journey. Around 900 before Christ, several regions of the world experienced major changes. In China, the period known as the Eastern Zhou begins, while in Egypt, the pharaohs of the kingdom of Kush dominate. In Italy, the Villanovan culture develops, and on the American continent, the Olmec civilization flourishes in the lowlands of the Gulf of Mexico. Trade expands, connecting distant territories through networks that facilitate the circulation of raw materials and prestigious objects. Environmental crises, including droughts in the Mediterranean, force populations to rethink their lifestyles and political organization. Technological innovations, such as the use of iron, redefine warfare, agriculture, and tool production. The Zhou dynasty, founded a few centuries earlier, controls a vast area of China. Its rulers have established a complex feudal system by granting fiefs to the royal family and allies. Around 900 before Christ, the central power weakens, giving more autonomy to regional lords. This period of the Eastern Zhou is characterized by administrative and military decentralization, while maintaining significant cultural prestige thanks to the concept of the mandate of heaven, which justifies royal sovereignty. Rites and sacrifices remain at the heart of power, supported by a moral order supposed to ensure prosperity. Ancient Chinese manuscripts testify to an embryonic bureaucratic system. We also observe a spread of bronze workshops, improved weapons, an evolution in war chariots, and the early signs of iron metallurgy, still minor but heralding future changes. In Egypt, the kingdom of Kush, established in the south in Nubia, imposes its authority up to the delta. This dynasty, known as the 25th dynasty, consolidates its power first in Napata, then Meroe, while maintaining the pharaonic tradition, construction of monuments, hieroglyphic writing, worship of the Egyptian gods, notably Amun-Ra. Their presence restores relative stability to an Egypt previously weakened by divisions and invasions. Around 900 before Christ, the Kushite power must contend with threats in Western Asia and local lords ready to challenge the domination. Kushite Egypt is at the crossroads of trade routes, gold from Nubia, incense, and myrrh transiting through the Red Sea, and luxury goods circulating to the Levant. This prosperity remains fragile in the face of climatic uncertainties and local rivalries in East Africa. In Italy, the Villanovan culture, a formative stage of the Etruscan civilization, unfolds between the 9th and 8th century before Christ, mainly in Emilia-Romagna and Tuscany. It is characterized by a specific type of pottery and a community organization around small villages. The biconical urn burials are a distinctive archaeological marker. Bronze grave goods attest to advanced craftsmanship, and iron rapidly improves techniques. Around 900 before Christ, these populations intensify their Mediterranean exchanges, trading with Phoenicians, Sardinians, and Greeks in search of metals and resources. The period also sees the emergence of social hierarchies, visible in the differentiation of tombs, indicating power based on the control of land and trade routes. On the other side of the Atlantic, the Olmecs, one of the oldest pre-Columbian civilizations, established themselves in the swampy regions of the Gulf of Mexico. Between 1200 and 400 before Christ, they developed remarkable art, notably their famous colossal heads, which probably represent revered leaders or ancestors. Around 900 before Christ, their centers like San Lorenzo and La Venta experienced an artistic and religious peak with monumental sculptures, engraved steles, and advanced use of jade for ornaments. The Olmecs played a role as a mother culture in Mesoamerica, influencing rudimentary writing, calendars, and rituals like the ball game. Their cities, organized around ceremonial platforms, reveal a stratified society. The elites controlled agricultural redistribution, notably of corn, and held complex religious knowledge evident in the numerous votive offerings. In the confines of Central Asia, caravan routes connect Afghanistan, rich in tin essential for bronze production, to the urban centers of Mesopotamia, where artisans were already working with harder metals for weapons and tools. The tin sometimes traversed mountains before reaching the workshops of Mesopotamia or the Levant. Moreover, African ivory circulated to Egypt, Phoenicia, and various kingdoms in the Middle East, highly prized for ornaments and luxury items. Further north, amber from the Baltic Sea, nicknamed the Gold of the North, was exported to Greece, Italy, and Asia Minor, used as a prestige marker for necklaces, seals, or amulets. Historians have partially reconstructed these exchanges through archaeological evidence, showing that even without modern globalization, an active trade network fostered the diffusion of techniques and social innovations. These contacts also favored the circulation of political and religious ideas while influencing power dynamics. Wars for control of trade routes or metal deposits were fueled by the growing access to iron, which spread around 900 before Christ in the Fertile Crescent, Anatolia, and Europe. Harder than bronze, iron revolutionized weapons and agricultural tools, making armies and agriculture more efficient. The quest for mineral-rich lands became a priority for rulers. In China, the use of iron remained sporadic, but techniques evolved. In the Mediterranean basin, the transition from bronze to iron was gradual, with blacksmiths perfecting their forges despite the scarcity of deposits. In Assyria and Urartu, kings bolstered their power through mastery of metallurgy and enhancement of arsenals. However, environmental crises weighed on the Mediterranean basin, with repeated droughts destabilizing agriculture and trade. Cyclical climate changes and intensive farming practices impoverished the soil. Peoples responded with migrations, city reorganizations, military alliances, and rituals to appease deities. In Egypt, the Nile's flood determined subsistence, and its variations caused famines and political instability. In Greece, the scarcity of cereals pushed towards colonization beyond the peninsula. In China, alternating floods and droughts shaped social and economic organization, necessitating dike maintenance. In Mesopotamia, the fluctuations of the Tigris and Euphrates led to water shortages, affecting the prosperity of empires. At the heart of Assyria, in the Tigris Valley, future rulers like Tiglath-Pileser III or Sennacherib inherited an expanding political system. A strong centralization of power was already observed, maintained trade routes, military campaigns to assert influence, and tribute collection. Fortresses protected cereals, arsenals, and treasures from trade. Exchanges of precious objects included marble, gold from the north, and lapis lazuli from Central Asia. Assyrian sculptors began to develop advanced engraving techniques visible in the royal palaces in the following century. In this context of long-distance exchanges, some objects cross continents and seas to end up in very different cultures. This is the case of an Egyptian scarab, typical of seals or lucky charms, discovered in the 19th century in the Assyrian palace of Nimrud in Iraq. This find testifies to the intensity of contacts between Egypt and Assyria, separated by the Levant and long caravan routes. In Egypt, these scarabs symbolize renewal and the solar cycle, linked to the god Khepri. In Assyria, they may have been present as diplomatic gifts, prestige barter, or war booty. The engraved inscriptions sometimes identify pharaohs or contain protective formulas. Their presence illustrates the importance royal courts attach to symbols of authority and foreign amulets, both for their exoticism and for their protective role of the sovereign. In 900 before Christ, the Chinese, Egyptian Kushite, Villanovan, and Olmec cultural spheres were not closed worlds. They were part of a vast network of direct or indirect relations, where knowledge, techniques, beliefs, and objects circulated. The majority of the populations were unaware of the existence of other distant civilizations, but some elites, informed by embassies, merchants, or adventurers' tales, maintained mutual correspondences and curiosities. Thus, tin from Afghanistan and amber from the Baltic met in Mediterranean strategic ports, from where they sometimes departed to Egypt or the Near East. Caravans transported African ivory to the Arabian Peninsula and then to Syria or Phoenicia to adorn thrones and sacred texts. Chinese craftsmen perfected ritual bronzes, while other regions developed ironwork. In Central America, Olmec priests calculated lunar phases for their fertility rites, erecting monuments that would be rediscovered millennia later. In the Near East, subject to climatic hazards, the survival of kingdoms depended on the protection of harvests and the loyalty of vassal cities. The abandonment of certain sites testifies to crises such as invasions or famines, while the end of the second millennium before Christ saw the collapse of great civilizations like the Hittites or Mycenaean palaces. Around 900 before Christ, new resilient power centers emerged, which would use iron metallurgy to establish their dominance. Egypt, fragmented for a time, regained cohesion under Kushite pharaohs, despite the threat of rivals in western Upper Asia. The Zhou in Eurasia faced an increasingly independent aristocracy, giving rise to rival states while preparing the intellectual background for Confucianism. The Villanovan populations laid the foundations of Etruscan culture, soon in contact with Greek and Phoenician merchants, paving the way for the rise of Italian cities. The Olmecs began an heritage that would radiate on the Mexican plateau and the Mayan lowlands for centuries to come. The episode of the Egyptian scarab, found in the Assyrian palace of Nimrud, illustrates the complexity of trade and diplomatic exchanges. This talisman, a sacred Egyptian symbol, crossed borders and ended up in an Assyrian royal treasury, a people with different beliefs, but who recognized the symbolic value of the object. For the Assyrians, devotees of Assur or Ishtar, a foreign artifact, could signify the universality of royal power. Soldiers, scribes, or craftsmen, brought back from campaigns, also contributed to the circulation of symbols and artistic styles. A small stone seal testifies that at the turn of the first millennium before Christ, the world was already woven with subtle connections, foreshadowing great upheavals. In the mid-8th century before Christ, Upper Assyria faced many challenges that required a new imperial management. The throne was occupied by Tiglath-Pileser III, whose reign from 745 to 727. Before Christ marked a major transformation of the Assyrian state apparatus. Under his authority, the army became professional, supported by a structured taxation system and an unprecedented network of royal roads. This centralization was accompanied by a policy of deportations aimed at economically and politically controlling the conquered territories. Tiglath-Pileser III, from the beginning of his reign, established a permanent army, replacing the seasonal recruitment based on peasant soldiers and often heterogeneous vassal contingents. This disciplined and ever-present force allowed for swift reaction to revolts and maintained pressure on the borders. Incorporation became continuous, with specialized soldiers, archers, cavalrymen, engineers, and standardized equipment to reinforce cohesion and efficiency. Logistics were also strengthened. Royal roads, leveled and equipped with water points, fortified stops, and beacons, connected major cities like Kalhu, Dur-Sharrukin, and Nineveh. These routes facilitated the rapid movement of armies, officials, and tributes. A postal relay system called Piru allowed royal messengers to efficiently deliver orders and information over long distances, ensuring solid administrative control. Fiscally, Tiglath-Pileser III reformed the system by dividing the empire into provinces administered by governors appointed by the king. These provinces collected taxes in kind or in precious metals, rigorously recorded by Assyrian scribes. This regular flow financed the permanent army and infrastructures like roads, palaces, and fortresses. This arrangement ensured direct control over conquered populations, limiting their autonomy and integrating the entire territory into a centralized fiscal and political network. To reinforce his domination and fully exploit human resources, the empire used an effective method: productive deportations. In the history of the Near East, deporting a vanquished group to deprive them of their land is not unheard of. Previous Assyrian kings resorted to it, often to break the resistance of rival elites and assert their authority. Tiglath-Pileser III systematized this practice, not only to punish, but also to economically capitalize on his conquests. Thousands of people from conquered regions were relocated to uncultivated lands, requiring agricultural labor, depopulated cities to be repopulated, or production workshops. Archives show a desire to make the most of the skills of displaced populations. Metalworkers sent to suitable centers, farmers skilled in irrigation relocated where their expertise was needed. These deportations, though traumatic, bolstered the imperial economy. The convoys were monitored and their arrivals meticulously recorded. Some exiles found in this transfer an opportunity to establish themselves, avoiding a harsher fate reserved for rebels. This policy was facilitated by an efficient road network that allowed populations to be transported over long distances via royal roads and postal relays. Provincial stewards received reports on the arrival of families, blacksmiths, weavers, or scribes. Some were dispatched near quarries to extract stone, others to recently conquered border areas to establish new villages under Assyrian authority. Through these systematic relocations, Tiglath-Pileser III sought to strengthen the kingdom's cohesion and profitability, breaking the strong local identities and promoting a continuous mix of people and skills. Assyrian sources, triumphalistic, present these movements as proofs of royal superiority. They extol the king's talent to move mountains, defeat enemy kings, and bring their warriors into this country. The scribes highlight the benevolence of the sovereign, offering these populations the shelter of Assur's house, while emphasizing their now mandatory obedience. In this ideology, deportation becomes a civilizing act, justified by the desire to establish divine order over vast territories. Yet, on the ground, the reality is harsher. Exiles are subjected to rigorous administration, forced to work for the state. In this context appears an emblematic artifact of Tiglath-Pileser III's assimilation policy, the Dal contract. The texts mention an exile, probably a captured clan leader, receiving a clay figurine representing a character or territorial symbol. This figurine, far from being a mere toy, serves as a legal document, validating the cession of land or the imposition of authority in the new province. The document specified the new arrival's legal obligations towards the crown and the conditions for exploiting the parcel. The ritual consisted of symbolically transferring this land to the exile. This practice illustrates the complexity of imperial politics. The violence of deportation coexists with a form of legal recognition. The puppet becomes a silent charter, an object of transition and forced integration. Some historians see in it the Assyrian administrative sophistication, capable of organizing every aspect of the exiles' lives, from their registration to the cultivation of fields. Others see a gesture of humiliation, reminding the deportee of his absolute tutelage, forced to accept this figurine as the only legal sign of his new condition. The puppet contract also testifies to the legal and bureaucratic innovations under Tiglath-Pileser III. Each province has scribes under royal control, recording population movements, land use, taxes, and the allocation of resources. In this system, the figurine is a link in the global control chain. By receiving it, the deportee commits to respect his condition, to pay his taxes, and to serve the empire, under penalty of losing his host land or even being executed in case of rebellion. Several examples of this type of contract are mentioned in the archives, sometimes fragmentarily. The scribes mention in some letters the importance of delivering these figurines in good form under the authority of a representative of the king or a priest, depending on the regions. The act was surrounded by ritual formulas, calling the gods Assur, Shamash, or Ishtar, to witness the commitment made by the exile. This religious dimension underlies the organization of the Assyrian monarchy. War, taxation, deportation, everything is perceived as a manifestation of the divine will embodied in the royal person. The vanquished must comply with this fusion of politics and the sacred under penalty of total exclusion. This ritual reinforces the idea that the Assyrians do not just annex territories militarily, they seek to structure and harmonize the entire empire. By eliminating any desire for autonomy, they establish a tight administrative network secured by royal roads, fueled by gradual taxation, and controlled by a permanent army. As the ancient city-states integrate, their population must learn Assyrian codes, whether it be the forced delivery of a figurine or the fiscal rules. At the same time, the upper society benefits from the transfers of skills and labor to consolidate its prosperity. The reforms of Tiglath-Pileser III disrupt the organization of power by establishing a permanent professional army, developing large circulation axes with postal relays, and designing strictly supervised provincial taxation. He creates the conditions for solid and stable expansion. His successors, whether warriors or administrators, inherit this efficient apparatus. The Assyrian Empire becomes the symbol of authoritarian centralization and disciplined militarism, a reputation attested in later texts. The memory of the puppet contract remains a symbol of both Assyrian administrative ingenuity and the constraint imposed on its displaced subjects. Under Sennacherib's reign, the Neo-Assyrian Empire reaches unprecedented power, marked by great architectural projects and a strong military policy. Upon the death of his father Sargon II, he transfers the capital to Nineveh, which he transforms into an urban jewel. Cuneiform tablets and bas-reliefs testify to his projects, enlarging the walls, digging canals, constructing sumptuous palaces. His ambition is to affirm the glory of his reign and make Nineveh the largest city of the kingdom. The economic activity intensifies, and artisans from Syria or Anatolia participate in the works. The king brings stone, wood, and metal to renovate temples, gates, and fortifications, making the city unassailable. The royal palace, called Palace Without Equal, is at the heart of this renovation. Sennacherib supervises each stage, bas-reliefs recounting his victories, stone carvers sculpting orthostats showing submitted dignitaries, refined garden decorations with pools and canals irrigating orange trees and rare plants. He presents himself as a king gardener, a symbol of a fertile and well-governed land. The aqueduct of Jerwan, constructed around 690 before Christ, illustrates Assyrian technical mastery. Located near Nineveh, it diverts a tributary of the Great Zab to supply the capital with drinking water and irrigation. Its structure of dressed stones, reinforced with metal pegs and a bituminous foundation, demonstrates advanced engineering. The inscriptions praise the feat and the project to cultivate the plain around Nineveh, providing the inhabitants with stable access to water, symbolizing a modern Assyria capable of great works. At the same time, Sennacherib's foreign policy consolidates regional domination. He faces uprisings in Babylonia, the resistance of the Phoenician cities allied to Egypt, and the rebellions of the Aramean tribes. In 701, before Christ, his campaign in Syria-Palestine subdues several Canaanite cities, imposes an annual tribute, and illustrates his military prowess. The bas-reliefs of the palace depict the siege of Lachish with battering rams, siege towers, and protected archers. Sennacherib deports part of the population to crush any revolt, sending a strong message against opposition. In the following years, he turns towards Egypt, divided and influenced by the 25th Kushite dynasty. Desiring to weaken this competing presence and control the trade routes to the Nile, he launches several challenging campaigns due to distances and hostile areas. Although he does not completely subdue Egypt, his actions weaken the Egyptian-Kushite alliance, preparing the way for his successor's conquest. The Phoenician cities, located on the coast of present-day Lebanon, are crucial for Assyria's commercial prosperity. They are important transit points for Mediterranean goods. Sennacherib regularly demands a tribute, established in a subjugation treaty, including cedar wood and purple dye. The cedar from the mountains of Lebanon is used for constructing palaces and boats, utilized for roofs, doors, and frameworks. The purple, extracted from a marine mollusk through a complex process, is a reddish-violet dye, reserved for luxury garments worn at the Assyrian court and offered to foreign dignitaries. This tribute symbolizes the empire's extended domination, which stretches from the Iranian heights to the Syrian shores. Court life also includes the import and capture of wild animals for royal zoological gardens. During Sennacherib's reign, living lions are captured in Mesopotamia, Syria, or Arabia. These Asian lions, though smaller than their African cousins, pose a danger to livestock. Capturing these animals without killing them is a royal feat, proving his ability to tame nature. The bas-reliefs of Nineveh illustrate these hunts, where some lions are kept to adorn the royal parks. Specially trained keepers watch over them. These beasts are displayed to foreign diplomats to impress and remind them of the empire's grandeur. Dominating the king of animals attests to a divine mandate. In 681, before Christi, the sudden death of Sennacherib, likely in a conspiracy, opens the way for his son Esarhaddon. Despite initial unrest, he resumes his father's projects and asserts his legitimacy as a continuator of the Assyrian dynasty. He restores temples in Nineveh and maintains the Jeroen aqueduct, vital for irrigating orchards and the population. His reign ensures the abundance of grains and vegetables, minimizing the risk of famine. Esarhaddon also inherits the Egyptian issue. Taking advantage of divisions between Kushite rulers and local military chiefs, he leads an expedition in 671 that captures Memphis in the Delta. This spectacular victory allows him to seize wheat, gold, and capture members of the Egyptian elite. Stelae commemorate this campaign, presented as a triumph against rebellious princes. This achievement increases Esarhaddon's prestige, and the Phoenician cities redouble their efforts to pay their tribute, supplying cedar and purple. Under his reign, Nineveh transforms further. He repairs fortified gates, erects monumental statues of the protective gods Ashur and Ishtar, and adorns the city with inscriptions extolling his piety. Official censuses mention war booty, precious metals, horses, slaves, and luxury fabrics. The expansion of the zoological gardens continues, with gazelles, ostriches, and baboons from Nubia. These animals symbolize the empire's vastness without borders. To finance these projects, Esarhaddon rigorously organizes the management of tributes, the surveillance of trade routes, and the collection of taxes. Royal stewards are subjected to frequent inspections. Scribes record grains, soldiers, prisoners, and metal royalties. Wealth extracted from Egypt, Mediterranean cities, and Elam finances administration, the army, the royal family, and temple construction, which are signs of legitimacy. Animals captured during campaigns are conveyed to the palaces of Nineveh under tight protection. The treatment given to wild beasts marks the royal prestige. Lions captured during spectacular hunts symbolize the king's divine power. Often depicted in bas-reliefs as supreme trophies, they affirm that the monarch reigns not only over men, but also over nature. Foreign visitors, coming to sign treaties or renew their vassalages, are impressed by the presence of these predators in cages. For the Assyrians, it is a reminder of the cosmic order. The king, chosen by the gods, maintains the victorious struggle against the chaos embodied by wild beasts. Official texts present these hunts as sacred rituals where the sovereign obtains divine favor by triumphing over the lion. The captive animals are kept in enclosures monitored by officials, with precise inventories of food and water rations, and attendants responsible for cleaning the areas to prevent diseases. Over time, Nineveh becomes a resplendent urban center where richly decorated temples, sculpted palaces, canals, and gardens with rare plants coexist. Foreign delegations leave with epic tales, a city where the heat is overcome thanks to complex hydraulic installations, where the king, crowned with the glory of his ancestors, receives the peoples of the mountains and the sea. Scribes meticulously record the donations to temples and the repairs of the walls that protect this city, the fruit of reforms initiated by Sennacherib and continued under Esarhaddon. Beyond Nineveh, Esarhaddon supervises projects in Babylon, a city his father harshly struck after uprisings. Aware of the importance of the Babylonian priests, he wishes to rebuild the devastated sanctuaries to gain their support. However, Nineveh remains the empire's heart, a significant market where caravans sell spices, fabrics, and precious stones. Merchants negotiate with royal officers to procure iron, bronze, or wool. The lions captured under Sennacherib continue to occupy their enclosures in the heart of the palace gardens, their roar sometimes resounding in the early morning as the king prepares to hold council. The joint reign of Sennacherib and Esarhaddon represents the Neo-Assyrian apex. The empire extends to the borders of Egypt, while Phoenicia remains subjugated through the regular payment of cedar and purple. The conquests reinforce the legitimacy of the sovereigns who display their successes on the walls of Nineveh. Gigantic constructions, like the Aqueduct of Jerwin, testify to both military and administrative organization. This development requires strict control of labor, supplies, and technical know-how. The continuous spectacle of captured lions reinforces the image of an invincible monarchy, a guarantor of civilized order in the face of natural and human threats. The royal annals remind that military victory, economic prosperity, and divine support demonstrate that the dynasty is destined to guide the known world. The famous library of Ashurbanipal was founded in the 7th century before Christ, during the reign of King Ashurbanipal. Located in Nineveh, the Neo-Assyrian capital in Upper Mesopotamia, this library gathers nearly 30,000 tablets in cuneiform writing. Ashurbanipal, a learned sovereign, devotes vast resources to building this collection, which includes literature, science, medicine, and divination. Supported by a network of expert scribes, it enhances the cultural reputation of Nineveh and illustrates the king's desire to extend Assyrian civilization beyond its borders. For centuries, cuneiform tablets have contained essential texts for Mesopotamian administration and religion. They are made of engraved clay that is then dried or fired. The library of Ashurbanipal goes beyond a mere accumulation of official documents. It includes technical treatises, lexical lists for scribe training, astronomical and astrological treatises, as well as diplomatic correspondences. Modern excavations have revealed political, commercial, and religious texts. At that time, this knowledge was meticulously cataloged under royal authority, giving rulers the ability to consult, authenticate, and reproduce any document crucial to the management of the empire or to understanding the divine world. Within this vast collection, one sector stood out: medical epistles. The tablets dedicated to the art of healing, mixed clinical prescriptions and magical formulas, demonstrating a syncretism between practical science and religion. Healers, known as Asu, empirical doctors, and sometimes Ashipu, exorcists dealing with spiritual ailments, consulted these texts to prepare remedies and rituals. The tablets record common illnesses such as digestive disorders, joint pain, or respiratory infections, but also beliefs attributing certain afflictions to demonic causes. Medical correspondences, sometimes between distant provinces, exchanged recipes, ingredients, and exotic potions made accessible through the Assyrian trade routes. This part of the library reflects the Assyrian king's desire to control the health of their subjects and to reinforce their authority through mastery of the inexplicable. At the heart of the collection, one text reached the status of a canonized version, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Of Sumerian Akkadian origin, it narrates the adventures of the legendary king Gilgamesh and addresses friendship, the quest for immortality, and the confrontation with mortality. The library of Ashurbanipal gathered standardized tablets in several parts creating a literary canon that imposed a unique cultural model. Every subject, scribe, and temple had to know this common foundation. Gilgamesh became an intellectual pillar thanks to Ashurbanipal's centralization policy. Its epic, with its philosophical scope, also served to understand the human condition, the futility of defying the gods, the necessity to respect the cosmic order, and the value of friendship. Ashurbanipal demonstrated an obsession with the preservation and dissemination of knowledge. He sent scribes to Babylon, Borsippa, Nippur, or Uruk to locate ancient texts, sometimes sacred or secret, which they copied to bring back to Nineveh. These originals could be permanently seized, causing resentment among local elites deprived of their masterpieces. Annotations on the copies indicated to respect the layout, the signs, and the language, Akkadian or archaic Sumerian, to honor the gods and manifest the cultural superiority of the Assyrian Empire. Any rare document, ritual, or magical text particularly interested the sovereign. Through this process, Ashurbanipal aimed to make Nineveh a universal center of knowledge. The library also functioned as an inter-temple loan system. Tablets could be sent to sanctuaries or scribes' workshops upon request, ensuring provincial libraries were updated. This circulation, controlled by the central power, offered scholars wide access to literature, reinforcing cultural cohesion in an empire extending to Egypt and Anatolia. Thus, the Library of Ashurbanipal played the role of a true knowledge hub in the Fertile Crescent. Scribes, major actors, ensured the translation of ancient texts from Sumerian to Akkadian, the administrative language. Their training, passed down from generation to generation, included the study of literary works, lexical lists, and translation exercises. They mastered cuneiform calligraphy and various dialects. This technical knowledge granted them a privileged status. They could influence the final drafting, commentary, or organization of texts. Some kept records of their methods, discoveries, travels, or acquisitions, preserved for future generations. A famous anecdote illustrates this competition. The tablet, How I Stole the Babylonians' Writings. According to fragments, a proud Assyrian scribe recounts how he sneaked into a temple in Babylon or Borsippa to acquire an ancient corpus of tablets. The term stole needs to be qualified. Sometimes it was a loan that was never returned or a transfer justified by royal interest. The author humorously describes his stealth, the difficulty of carrying these heavy tablets, and the importance of his acquisitions to enrich Ashurbanipal's collections. This text illustrates several aspects of the Assyrian literate culture. First, it shows that the possession of rare texts was part of an intellectual competition between cities and groups of scholars. The Library of Nineveh, supported by royal will, held official authority, but the scribes of Babylon or other cities often resisted handing over their treasures. Negotiations, infiltrations, or political agreements could result in the sending or confiscation of tablets. Secondly, the scribe boasts, which reveals a culture of individual success, rare in official texts that generally remain impersonal. Here, we perceive the pride, humor, and personal creativity of the scribe, suggesting that the Assyrian literate world was not only made of fixed formulas and devotion to power. Finally, this anecdote sheds light on the complex relations between the Assyrian Empire and Babylon, whose millennial culture was admired. The Babylonians had archives, founding myths like the Epic of Gilgamesh, and advanced astrological science. For the Assyrians, Bringing this knowledge to Nineveh served to secure this heritage and assert the capital's supremacy as an intellectual center. Controlling this legacy legitimized the king as a universal heir and affirmed the natural succession of the Assyrians against the great cities of the south. The scribe's light-hearted tone reminds us that this process of centralization was not without tensions and pride. The library of Ashurbanipal, with its 30,000 tablets, medical treatises, and its canonized version of the Epic of Gilgamesh, became the pride of Nineveh. It justified the superiority of the capital not only through military conquests, but also through the mastery of the written tradition, the guarantor of cosmic order. A system of intertemple loans and forced expeditions to acquire tablets reflect the royal desire to disseminate a unified knowledge. The boastful scribe's account thus testifies to both an era and the Assyrian thirst for cultural appropriation, to seize the most sacred and prestigious assets of Babylon. This mixture of scientific ambition, religious fervor, and symbolic competition characterizes the intellectual summit of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Around 645, before Christ, the Neo-Assyrian Empire still appears imposing. From Nineveh, its fortified capital, the Assyrian kings have established a vast network of provinces and vassals stretching from present-day eastern Turkey to the Mediterranean and the Elamite border to the east. Yet, successive conquests have strained military and financial resources beyond their limits. Garrisons must monitor several distant fronts, while prosperity struggles to meet growing needs, especially in food and horses. Tensions arise in various regions under heavy tax pressure. Revolts first break out in Elam in southwestern Iran, a longtime rival of Assyria. Taking advantage of the Assyrian military weakening, some cities now refuse to pay tribute and harass isolated garrisons. The loss of Elam deprives the empire of an essential buffer zone and jeopardizes its grain reserves. The entire imperial logistics suffers from a noticeable lack of provisions. To the north and east, the Medes rise in turn. These peoples from the Iranian plateau regain confidence in the face of Assyrian inability to crush the uprisings. The once impregnable frontier fortresses are poorly supplied, and corruption siphons off essential funds. The Median revolt deprives the empire of its observation posts and control over crucial trade routes. In lower Mesopotamia, Babylon is also agitated. A city with a rich past, it suffers resentment from the forced displacement of artisans and requisitions. Several influential families finance clandestine groups, hoping to take advantage of the Assyrian relaxation to regain control and break free from Nineveh. A tacit alliance between Babylonians, Medes, and Elamites forms a front of contestation extending to the heart of the Tigris and Euphrates. Faced with this, the Assyrians try to mobilize more troops, but the professionalization of the army shows its limits, with expenses growing faster than the treasury can support the permanent forces. The Assyrian war effort relies on a constant flow of resources: arms, arrows, chariots, repairs, communication. Postal relays, essential for transmitting orders, suffer budget cuts, lengthening delays, and complicating coordination among provincial governors. The military deficit worsens due to a drought affecting the middle course of the Tigris, a key region for supplying grains to the capital. Administrative tablets document the partial collapse of agricultural production, with secondary canals dried up and low water levels preventing river transport, essential for moving troops and goods. Wheat and barley are then transported by road at a high cost, while the army lacks forage for its horses. In Nineveh, the large grain reserves, once a buffer during famines, are rapidly depleting due to military requisitions, losses to rebels, and population growth. The city, once prosperous, sees an influx of refugees fleeing the countryside, overburdening popular districts, and causing sanitation issues and rationing problems. The local population blames the court and dignitaries for neglecting the warning signs of this repeated drought. The religious climate is affected. Priests interpret divine signs by examining the livers of sacrificial animals or observing the stars. These omens, usually used to legitimize royal authority, have become darker. A Babylonian chronicle reports that the rain did not come for the god Assur, suggesting that divine favor has withdrawn from Assyria, perhaps due to the destruction and conquered shrines. These difficulties fuel rumors and suspicions at court. Some dignitaries are accused of treason or complicity with the Medo-Babylonian rebels. Archives document an increase in trials for conspiracy or mismanagement of food stocks, with penalties ranging from expropriation to exile. A climate of paranoia destabilizes the elite, with some governors hesitating to mobilize their forces, preferring to protect their territories. This internal division, coupled with revolts, accelerates the decline of Assyrian influence at the borders. Along the Elamite border, the Assyrians conduct sporadic counteroffensives, sometimes retaking fortresses, but without lasting success. The rebels engage in a war of attrition, using ambushes and retreats in inaccessible areas, which exhaust the Assyrian forces. Despite official proclamations of victory, distant campaigns are abandoned in favor of consolidation around Nineveh. Meanwhile, the Medes strengthen their positions in the northern mountains and threaten the communication lines to Anatolia. Nineveh attempts to provoke intertribal conflicts among the Medes to divide the insurrection, but the growing unity of the Medo-Babylonian leaders thwarts these strategies. Even matrimonial alliances are no longer sufficient to ease the situation. Assyria lacks the prestige necessary to impose itself as a protective power. In Babylon, notables, supported by a large part of the population, intensify their aspirations for independence, accusing Assyrian domination of impoverishing the city. Thanks to strong commercial ties on the Euphrates, Babylon resists famine better and trades barley for horses with Arab tribes to prepare for a possible confrontation with Nineveh. Cultural traditions centered on Marduk strengthen Babylonian identity. Processions, restoration of damaged cults, and collective prayers call for the return of political stability under the banner of a free Babylon. In this tense atmosphere, the drought in the Middle Tigris spreads to other regions. Engineers struggle to maintain the impressive network of canals built under more prosperous rains. Seasonal floods, sometimes too weak, no longer fill the basins. Workers must be mobilized to dig or clear canals filled with sand by drying winds, but these peasants are missing from agricultural production, worsening the resource shortage. This spiral erodes the system. Administrative tablets show chronic delays in levee maintenance and a near-constant lack of grain to feed the population. Parallel to this, the imperial ideology glorifying strength starts to show cracks. The grand urban projects in Nineveh decline after the 640s before Christi. Stonemasons, less solicited, leave for more stable cities like Haran or the Levant. The artistic drive, characteristic of triumphant Assyria, collapses. The palaces meant to celebrate royal splendor remain unfinished, some inscriptions incomplete for lack of means or due to political disillusionment. The Assyrian army is divided by several crises. The troops must protect Nineveh and monitor borders with Elam, the Iranian Plateau, and Babylonia. The absence of rain compromises cattle farming, which provides leather for shields and harnesses. Blacksmiths, sometimes hastily mobilized, no longer produce enough iron weapons, which have become rare or too costly to extract. The royal roads, key to Assyrian power, are no longer properly maintained. Inns for messengers fall into ruin, while bandits and rebels attack travelers. The relay system no longer allows for efficient circulation of information, like in the days of Tiglath-Pileser III or Sennacherib. Political and religious deficiencies add up. The growing military deficit pushes dignitaries to seek a cosmic culprit. Diviners claim that the god Assur withdraws his support to punish the court's failings or accumulated sins. The lack of rains, although natural, is seen as a spiritual disgrace. Rural populations fear more severe punishments, which stirs panic instead of gathering them. The provincial elites forge secret contacts with Nineveh's enemies. Some prefects, fearing the fall of the capital, negotiate non-aggression treaties with the Medes or the Babylonians, ready to invade. This behavior will weaken resistance and facilitate the decay of the empire. On the ground, soldiers from various provinces sometimes lack motivation and desert under harsh conditions. The erosion of discipline is visible in military records, which report losing human meat, according to an Assyrian officer. Nineveh remains an active administrative center until the 620s before Christ E, but tension is palpable and provincial reports are increasingly alarming. The Babylonian Chronicle reports that the rain has not come for the god Assur, symbolizing the rift between imperial ambition and reality. Many see this as a premonition of the final disaster. Divine protection, essential to Assyrian reign's legitimacy, is now absent in the eyes of witnesses familiar with religious signs. Gradually, minds turn away from Nineveh, vulnerable due to its expanse, lack of renewable resources, and the anger of subjugated peoples. In a few years, several revolts synchronized like never before. Later, chroniclers will describe this period as a foretold tragedy for Assyria, caught between growing hostility from its former vassals, the drought weakening its logistics, and spiritual doubts shaking its religious foundations. Nineveh's fate is then played out against the Medo-Babylonian coalition determined to overthrow the capital. From 645 to 612. Before Christ, this Assyrian twilight embodies the decline of a once invincible empire, unable to face climatic disasters, mutinies, and uprisings. It is in this context that Mesopotamian history evolves towards the rise of Babylon and its allies, under the heavy sign of these words, "The rain has not come for the god Assur." At the turn of the 7th century before Christ, when the Assyrian Empire was at its peak, a new power emerged in the rich plain of Babylonia. Nabopolassar proclaimed himself king of Babylon around 626. Before Christ, taking advantage of the decline of Assyria weakened by revolts and the inability of its leaders to consolidate their borders. Provinces formerly subjugated sought independence, and Nabopolassar, of Chaldean origin, gathered local elites and allied with the Medes, a people from the current Iranian region, also under Assyrian domination. The Medes, under King Cyaxares, were already launching offensives against Assyria in the Zagros region. For decades, Assyrian campaigns in western Iran exhausted the Medes and fueled their resentment. The alliance between Babylonians and Medes allowed forces to concentrate against Assyria. Diplomatic negotiations led to a coalition aiming to topple Nineveh, the reputedly impregnable capital, protected by colossal walls and the Tigris and Kosur rivers. Nabopolassar reorganized the Babylonian army, rallying Aramean and Chaldean tribes from the southern marshes. Chariots were prepared, stocks accumulated, while Median diplomacy held Assyria at bay to the north and east. The goal was to encircle Assyria and then attack its capital. The coalition attacked several strongholds in the middle Tigris Valley, cutting off communication lines. Cities loyal to Nineveh fell after long and difficult sieges. The Babylonian chronicles praise Nabopolassar's courage, the liberator of Babylonia, and avenger of the deported. Cyaxares, on his part, weakened the garrisons to the east. With each victory, other regions rose up, and several Assyrian governors defected. In 612, before Christi, the coalition marched on Nineveh, a city founded on the eastern bank of the Tigris, famous for its royal palaces and massive walls. The siege was one of the most spectacular in Mesopotamian antiquity. The coalition took advantage of floods to breach the ramparts. After several weeks, Nineveh fell, delivering its treasures to the victors. The fall marked the abrupt collapse of Assyria, the sack of the palaces, and the execution of many dignitaries. This victory was major for Babylon and the region. Significant wealth flowed south, financing the Babylonian Renaissance. Symbolically, the fall of Nineveh ended centuries of Assyrian domination, marked by brutal conquests and massive deportations. It opened a new era, where Nabopolassar and his son Nebuchadnezzar II promoted the restoration of Sumerian Akkadian identity. This artistic and religious revival drew inspiration from Mesopotamian traditions predating Assyria. Ancient gods like Marduk, Ea, or Shamash regained their central place, and processions affirmed the legitimacy of power. Royal inscriptions explicitly linked Babylon's prestigious past to Nabopolassar's reign. Bureaucratic elites reorganized to record royal exploits and manage the administration fueled by tributes from former Assyrian territories. Restoration projects for Sumerian and Akkadian temples multiplied. Artisans reinterpreted traditional iconography with majestic statues and reliefs of triumph, consolidating the loyalty of southern cities and demonstrating the power of the new empire. The term Sumerian-Akkadian refers to the bicultural heritage of the region, where Sumer, the oldest civilization, and Akkad, more recent, coexisted. Akkadian became the dominant administrative language. By emphasizing this dual heritage, Nabopolassar asserted an immemorial legitimacy, connecting his authority to the first southern civilizations and the heirs of Sargon of Akkad. This strong reference distinguished Babylon from Assyria, founded on different myths. Finally, the Medo-Babylonian coalition was sealed by political and matrimonial treaties. Cyaxares linked his family to that of Nabopolassar, ensuring the alliance's stability. Each found their interest. The Medes provided military strength, while Babylon played a central economic role. This convergence enabled the victory over Nineveh and the construction of the new regional order. Babylonian archives show that Nabopolassar, from the outset, sought to centralize the kingdom's management. He sent agents to cities likely to support him and assigned positions to those who swore loyalty to him. Material incentives like land or tax exemptions reinforced the cohesion of the Babylonian elite. Official texts emphasize the role of Marduk, the local god, in legitimizing power. Nabopolassar claimed to govern in his name, protecting the sacred city and restoring its ancestral glory. Rituals in the Esagil, Marduk's main sanctuary, followed protocols aimed at demonstrating that the deity had entrusted Nabopolassar with the mission of restoring Babylon's supremacy. An anecdote illustrates this solemnity. A loyalty pact was reportedly sealed on a fragment of a meteorite, an object charged with divine force in Mesopotamian tradition. This fragment was presented before Babylonian and Median dignitaries, while Nabopolassar recited ritual formulas inviting submission to the will of Marduk and the ancestors. This oath, by touching or bowing before the stone, symbolized the advent of Babylonian power. If this narrative has taken on a legendary dimension, it reflects the sacred importance accorded to power. Ruling in the name of the gods engaged the community in a spiritual pact. The choice of a meteorite inscribed the empire in a cosmic history beyond human rivalries. Celestial signs, already present in Babylonian astronomy, reinforced the idea that the fall of Assyria was destined, paving the way for a renewal blessed by the gods. After the fall of Nineveh, Babylon asserted its authority through sacred gestures and concrete actions, rebuilding the walls, restoring abandoned irrigation canals. Nabopolassar presented Babylon as a prosperous center with secure trade routes where camel caravans and chariots traveled west and to the Persian Gulf. Taxes, more equitable than under Assyria, ensured stable revenues. The Medes obtained control of certain regions of eastern Anatolia and Iran, thus avoiding the fracture of the alliance due to divergent interests. Nabopolassar was both a rebel against Assyria and a legitimate founder of an autonomous state, supported by the Medes. He declared the independence of Babylon and promoted the liberation of the region, the protection of sanctuaries, and the restoration of ancient customs. This discourse found wide resonance, particularly among priests who feared the confiscation of their property under Assyria. The birth of the Neo-Babylonian Empire resulted from a dynamic combining rediscovered identity, military alliance, and religious legitimization. Nabopolassar launched his conquests and unified his kingdom, marking a lasting renewal in Mesopotamia. He extended his control to the Syro-Palestinian confines, following the imperial strategy of controlling roads, collecting tributes, and maintaining the cohesion of elites. The axis of power shifted from Nineveh to Babylon, and neighbors, whether Phoenicians, Arameans, or Egyptians, had to take note. The meteoritic ritual was reinterpreted to emphasize the extraordinary dimension of Babylon, an image reinforced by scribes through tablets glorifying the dynasty. The memory of this oath on a fragment of meteorite remained vivid in Babylonian historiography. Later texts refer to this episode as the symbol of a founding pact, an empire built on the will of the gods and the alliance of men determined to break the Assyrian yoke. It is sometimes compared to the archaic cult of celestial objects venerated in northern Arabia, highlighting the intercultural significance of the symbol. The sources do not specify what became of the fragment, whether it was kept in the sanctuaries of Babylon or offered to a temple in thanks. But the idea that it united Medes and Babylonians under Nabopolassar's banner was passed on to subsequent generations, reinforcing cohesion under the ensuing reigns, particularly under Nebuchadnezzar II, regarded as the heir of this founding moment. Freed from the Assyrian yoke, the city gradually became the new political heart of the region. Its burnt brick monuments sprang up at strategic locations, ziggurats inspired by the Sumerian era, palace complexes hosting foreign dignitaries, and temples dedicated to Marduk. Babylon regained its aura as a great Mesopotamian city, rich and influential. The Sumerian Akkadian heritage, openly claimed by Nabopolassar and his successors, was reflected in inscriptions reviving ancient cuneiform scripts to emphasize historical continuity. The New Year rituals gained increased importance, symbolizing the sacred link between earth and sky, and celebrating Marduk's role in the kingdom's destiny. The population identified with this regained power, proud to see Babylon shine, surpassing Nineveh, now a field of ruins. The triumph of Nabopolassar, his alliance with the Medes, and the destruction of Nineveh in 612. Before Christ marked a historic turning point in the Fertile Crescent, between the end of Assyrian hegemony and the emergence of a new Babylonian order. Babylonian accounts show how the king rallied the peoples under his banner, encouraging a cultural and religious program exalting the Sumerian Akkadian identity. The episode of the oath, sealed on the fragment of meteorite, illustrates the quasi-mystical dimension of this change in power. The diplomatic and military acts that followed firmly anchored Babylon's influence across a vast geographic arc. The political and cultic life of Mesopotamia now revolved around the south, and Nabopolassar's name resonated as that of the founder of an empire capable of succeeding Assyria and paving the way for an unprecedented splendor for Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar II, heir to the Neo-Babylonian throne around 605 before Christ, transformed Babylon, located on the Euphrates in present-day Iraq, into a monumental urban center, equipped with defensive, religious, and commercial infrastructures. His vision aimed to make the city a regional trade hub and a major place of worship for Marduk, the central deity. Upon his accession, Nebuchadnezzar II launched the renovation and expansion of the fortifications. The city, vulnerable along the Euphrates, was enclosed by a double wall system extending for several kilometers, a first enclosure of sun-dried bricks, followed by a second, more solid one with baked bricks, adorned with protective reliefs. Each wall had fortified gates controlling the passage of troops, merchants, and pilgrims. Cuneiform texts highlight the king's rigor in ensuring the quality of materials and the speed of the work. The most famous gate is the Ishtar Gate, dedicated to the goddess of love, war, and fertility, a symbol of imperial power. Built with blue glazed bricks, it is decorated with lions, dragons, and bulls, representing various deities. It opens onto the procession avenue leading to the main sanctuary. About 14 meters high, it illustrates the craftsmanship of the artisans and the royal propaganda, emphasizing Nebuchadnezzar II as the divine protector of Babylon. The reign also saw the reconstruction of the Etemenanki, a great ziggurat often associated with the Tower of Babel. This multi-story monument, made of baked bricks, probably rose to more than 50 meters, visible from afar. It symbolizes the king's devotion to Marduk and serves as an architectural landmark. Each floor had a ritual function and a specific color, linked to stars or myths. Precious materials, like bitumen from Susa or Phoenician cedar, enhanced the sacred value and durability of the structure. The Etemenanki also reinforced royal authority among the populations and neighboring powers. During the annual New Year ritual, the king symbolically renewed the pact between Babylon and its gods, ensuring the city's cohesion and the legitimacy of his conquests. Archaeologically, these ceremonies are evidenced by offerings, cattle transfer tablets for sacrifices, and processions to the top of the ziggurat. Finally, Nebuchadnezzar II focused on economic growth by optimizing the waterways. Babylon, situated between the eastern Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf, became a commercial crossroads. The king funded the excavation of a royal canal derived from the Euphrates, facilitating transport to the Gulf and accelerating trades. This canal enabled the import-export of rare spices, precious woods, stones, metals, and essentials for garrisons. Spices, like incense or cinnamon, were prized for rituals and medicine, but also for palatial cuisine, a sign of gastronomic refinement. The Royal Canal, directly connecting Babylon to the Gulf, constituted an ideal logistical artery to enrich the kingdom. Under the king's supervision, Babylonian engineers mastered earthworks and dike construction to ensure a steady flow of the Euphrates to the Gulf. Documents detail the volumes of earth extracted and the labor imposed on populations for maintaining the banks. Thanks to these developments, the local economy flourished, and Babylon asserted itself as an essential trading hub, welcoming land caravans from the north and commercial boats by water. This connection also favored the diffusion of Babylonian culture and enhanced the prestige of the monarch Nebuchadnezzar II beyond Mesopotamia. The king's urban ambition also manifested in grand construction projects. Besides the Ishtar Gate and the Etemenanki, he restored or built several temples dedicated to Nabu, god of writing, or Ishtar, warrior goddess. He expanded the royal palace to accommodate the army, officials, and diplomats. Numerous bricks bear his inscription, a common practice in Mesopotamia aiming to associate each building with its great builder. Archives testify to massive recruiting, including specialized craftsmen and deported populations, bringing diverse skills and techniques, notably for mosaics and stone carving. The policy of works also includes residential neighborhoods for merchants and visitors. The supply of water and food is a major challenge. Irrigation canals feed gardens and arable lands. Greek travelers, relying on testimonies, describe Babylon as a bustling city, surrounded by fields, orchards, parks, and green spaces arranged for ritual banquets. This image has sometimes been confused with that of the famous Hanging Gardens, whose existence remains debated but symbolizes the splendor of Babylon. The Ishtar Gate remains the most glorious ceremonial entrance, but the city has several other gates, each guarded by a garrison. Among them, the Cedar Gate evokes the significant use of cedar wood, a luxury material imported from Lebanon, used for frames and doors, reflecting the prestige and commercial alliances of the king. The construction sites engage workers, artisans, scribes, and accountants, who record materials and rations. In the Babylonian economy, work was often paid in food rations or beer, an essential and safe liquid food due to fermentation. A cuneiform tablet, dating from the reign of Nebuchadnezzar II, details the delivery of 24 liters of beer to a mason of the Cedar Gate. This quantity, high for a modern reader, corresponds to a low-alcohol and nutritious drink, a staple alongside bread. Workers also received oil, dates, or flour depending on their status. Highly skilled artisans could benefit from material or fiscal advantages, less well documented. This payment in beer illustrates the concrete mechanics of imperial constructions. While the king engraved his name on the monuments, the daily work relied on thousands of hands. Scribes meticulously recorded each detail from bricks delivered to rations distributed. This system reveals a state organization capable of managing a vast network, mixing local populations and war captives, enriching Babylonian administrative and artistic culture. The Cedar Gate testifies to the attention paid to architectural details. If the Ishtar Gate, with its blue bricks, is the emblem of Babylon, the Cedar Gate underscores investment in prestigious materials and royal symbolism. Account tablets indicate the duration of works, the number of men, quantities of bricks, mortar, wood, and pigments, under the control of supervisors reporting to administrators. The flow of resources to Babylon, combined with intensive labor, ensures a spectacular economic boom. The trade of spices and exotic products, facilitated by the Royal Canal, feeds the state, which reinvests in the army and other civil projects. Impressed diplomats and emissaries sometimes conclude alliance treaties. This international openness, inherited from Sumerian Akkadian traditions, is consolidated by the royal ambition to place Babylon at the summit of the known world. The archives keep track of taxes on caravans and goods, recorded at the Cedar Gate, which also served as a customs post where every merchandise was declared before entering the capital or proceeding to Arabia or the Gulf. The fragment of a tablet indicating the delivery of 24 liters of beer to a mason illustrates the transition between monumental glory and daily reality. Nebuchadnezzar II, a visionary builder, ensured that workers had sufficient supplies to continue their task, an organization coordinated by trained scribes and inherited from the first Mesopotamian cities. This management fueled the rapid expansion of the city while inspiring the tale of a prosperous kingdom, proud of its millenary culture and protective gods. The precise mention of the Cedar Gate recalls the variety of fortified accesses the king reinforced, just like the Ishtar Gate. The archaeological remains, although fragmentary, and the thousands of administrative tablets shed light on the dynamics of this period. Babylon, under Nebuchadnezzar II, is not just a place of worship, but a city where the exploitation of river routes and fortifications stimulates international trade. A diverse population works on monumental projects, sometimes receiving their pay in beer according to tradition. The Royal Canal facilitates the delivery of resources, confirming Babylon's central place in the Near East and promoting commercial growth, benefiting both the elites and workers assured of stable rations. On the walls of the Cedar Gate, the scent of cedar, a symbol of prestige, mingles with that of bricks heated by the sun. These 24 liters of beer testify to the link between Nebuchadnezzar II's imperial grandeur and the pragmatic reality of the construction site where a multitude of hands builds Babylon. In the second half of the 6th century before Christ, the Babylonian society reaches a remarkable intellectual refinement, while also showing some political and economic fragility. In a context where Mesopotamian culture relies on a millennia-old heritage, the Babylonian elites advance complex astronomical knowledge, particularly thanks to the goal year tablets. It's also the time when priests, scribes, and the population reinforce their piety towards Marduk and Ishtar, while integrating new deities from the Aramean communities, reflecting a syncretism indicative of the empire's vitality and openness. However, the first signs of a latent crisis are already perceived: uncertain royal succession, inflation of goods, and growing tensions between the crown and the Babylonian clergy. These elements foreshadow a major turning point where intellectual grandeur and political instability coexist. The goal year tablets bear witness to this late period through their precise records of celestial movements, lunar phases, solar eclipses, planetary trajectories. These observations enabled the development of calculation techniques able to anticipate cosmic phenomena considered divine signs several months to years in advance. To this end, scribes perfected the sexagesimal numbering inherited from the Sumerians, base 60, that facilitates the divisions necessary for astronomical measurements and geometry. This numbering goes beyond the scientific or religious framework, influencing the division of time into hours, minutes, and seconds, a convention still used today. The scribe schools, close to the Babylonian temples, are at the heart of this dynamism. They write, copy ancient tablets, and compare current data with the past. Some goal year tablets also contain astrological comments linking the observation of celestial bodies to divine will. For example, a rare conjunction between Mars and Jupiter might announce a poor barley harvest, while a certain lunar alignment foretells good yields. This quest for understanding the cosmos makes Babylon a major center of scholarship in the Near East. On the religious front, Marduk remains the principal deity, accompanied by his son Nabu, god of writing, and Ishtar, goddess of love and war. The religious landscape evolves with the influence of Aramean communities, whose beliefs coexist with Babylonian traditions thanks to well-established syncretism. The clergy preserve essential rituals while adopting certain attributes of other cults. The organization of the cult in temples is rigorous, particularly financially. Priests manage agrarian estates and collect offerings and taxes. An administrative tablet from this period reveals an early form of life insurance. A priest pays a sum and transfers property in exchange for a guarantee of decent funerals, with rites and prayers ensuring the rest of his soul. This practice illustrates the social and economic importance of the clergy, present at every stage of life. Meanwhile, Babylonian society experiences relative prosperity. Merchants travel the roads between Mesopotamia and Phoenicia, transporting fabrics, cedar, and luxury products from Egypt or Anatolia. Richly decorated crafts also circulate, while irrigation of the countryside allows the cultivation of barley and wheat. Babylon remains a bustling city, with the constant transport of grain to the markets. Yet, behind this apparent stability, tensions are building. From 560. Before Christi, a succession crisis breaks out. Nabonidus ascends the throne with the support of some dignitaries, but his political and religious choices create misunderstanding and hostility. A pious king, he favors the god Sin over Marduk, undertakes to restore ancient temples, but neglects the festivities in honor of Marduk, provoking the anger of the priests. Moreover, he leaves Babylon to settle for nearly 10 years in the oasis of Tema, in the northwest of the Arabian Peninsula, leaving the capital to regents devoid of authority over the elites. The reasons for this departure remain uncertain: extension of Babylonian influence, exploration of trade routes, or escape from priestly intrigues. This absence weakens the royal power and fuels growing distrust. During the king's voluntary exile, economic pressure increases. The price of barley doubles or even triples in a few years, which hits the most modest hard. This inflation is explained by reduced harvests linked to disruptions of the irrigation system, perhaps exacerbated by the absence of strong authority. Tensions with the clergy, already high for religious reasons, worsen due to disagreements over the management of finances and goods. The priests of Marduk, despite their privileges, fear for the prestige of their deity, and doubt the legitimacy of a king removed from the symbolic center of the empire. Babylonian scribes and diviners scrutinize the sky to detect omens, astrology serving to validate major decisions. A full moon turns red during an eclipse, a common phenomenon but always carrying fear, interpreted as a sign announcing divine anger against Babylon. The moon, linked to the deity Sin, protector of kings, thus carries an anxious message about the god's displeasure towards the sovereign's errors or the collective failure. The diviners, consulted by notables, priests, and sometimes the king, record rituals to avert bad luck, sacrifices, prayers, offerings. In normal times, These rites reassure the population and strengthen the monarch's image as the guardian of cosmic order. But the prolonged absence of Nabonidus weakens this function. Despite everything, the processions in honor of Marduk continue, even though the people and the clergy reproach the king, from Tema, for no longer fulfilling his visible duties like presiding over major festivals or promoting national unity. The priests maintain Babylonian culture through lavish rituals, although finances are strained. The income from clerical lands and herds is less stable, and the insecurity of the roads, due to conflicts and the absence of royal control, complicates trade. Rumors are circulating about the king's health and his new religious concerns, some accusing him of idolizing sin to the detriment of Marduk, a supposed cause of the perceived divine anger in the skies and fields. This religious conflict also reflects a power struggle. The clergy, popular in the city, is pressing to reaffirm Marduk, while the intelligentsia is worried about the decrease in royal grants for literary and scientific production. Some copying or teaching centers are slowing down, but the Mesopotamian intellectual momentum persists. Updated astronomical tablets, transmission of sexagesimal knowledge, and daily life continuing despite uncertainty. In the provinces, the situation is similar. Anxious governors, fears of Arab raids and foreign interference, notably Persians under Cyrus II. The specter of a foreign conquest fuels anxiety. The Babylonians, proud of their millennial history, struggle to imagine their empire faltering. Upon his return, Nabonidus finds a divided society. Agricultural inflation has widened inequalities. Commercial elites have sometimes profited from the increases, while small farmers and artisans suffer. The discontented priests have not obtained the expected symbolic guarantees, and even moderate supporters fear diplomatic isolation in the face of a hostile clergy. The atmosphere is tense, and new eclipses, although physically mundane, fuel apocalyptic interpretations in a context of deep unrest. As 540 before Christi approaches, internal fractures intensify. The increasing use of Aramaic documentation, in addition to Akkadian cuneiform, demonstrates cultural and linguistic mixing, but also reveals communities less connected to the Babylonian fate. In many temples, the fervor for Marduk is still impressive, but the cult lacks regular royal support to extend its influence. The esteemed astronomical and mathematical knowledge ceases to be a tool of legitimization for an absent or contested king. A subtle balance is unraveling, leaving the door open for major upheavals. The last vestiges of cosmic and political order embodied by Babylon are cracking, though the city retains its secular aura, celestial omens, inflated price lists for barley, and the king's remoteness fuel fears. The recording of a full red moon, seen as a divine message, expresses the anxiety of a people fearing the end of a world they thought was immutable and protected by the gods. Under the reign of Cyrus II, a new era opens in the Near East. In 539, before Christi, this Achaemenid ruler prepares to enter Babylon, a city long fascinating for travelers and the powerful. The Neo-Babylonian kingdom is undergoing a delicate period. Its monarch, Nabonidus, annoys part of the elites with his religious policies and absences. The Persian army, disciplined and avoiding destruction, adopts a diplomatic approach. Cyrus must conquer not only a territory, but also the support of a population proud of its heritage. He favors a peaceful entry by seeking the support of local priests and dignitaries, essential in Babylonian administration. Aware that religious rites and temples dictate daily life, He shows that the Persian Empire does not seek to destroy this cultural heritage. The conquest of Babylon takes place at the end of October 539, before Christ, almost bloodlessly thanks to cooperation from factions weary of Nabonidus. Rather than plunder, Cyrus protects temples and sanctuaries, imposing himself as a liberator rather than a destroyer in order to win the approval of the elites and followers of Marduk. The Cyrus Cylinder, an Akkadian text dated to his arrival, presents the king as chosen by Marduk. Some call it the first declaration of human rights, because it proclaims the freedom of populations and the restoration of cults, but it is mainly a propaganda proclamation extolling the king's clemency and his will to restore religious order, thereby legitimizing his authority. By invoking Marduk, Cyrus reassures the Babylonians deeply attached to their gods. The high priests, guardians of sanctuaries and rites, play a key role in the power transition. Their support or neutrality ensures the installation of the new sovereign, maintaining cosmic continuity despite the change of dynasty. Cyrus allows several local elites to retain their positions. The Babylonian dignitaries, heirs of ancient traditions, keep their posts, ensuring tax management and the maintenance of sanctuaries. By preserving these bureaucratic structures, he avoids massive rejection and limits the risk of rebellion, ensuring the continuity of daily life with minimal civil and religious interference. Babylon does not become the imperial capital. Cyrus and his successors build their residences in Susa and Persepolis, symbols of Achaemenid power. But Babylon remains an economic and administrative pillar located on the Euphrates, a major commercial crossroads. Through its canals and historical influence, it attracts merchants and officials from all over the empire. Mastering Babylon guarantees the regular flow of crops and goods, the city remaining a prestigious religious and cultural center. The local population, active in agriculture and trade, benefits from the Persian road network. Merchants have new routes to transport their products. Babylon, rich in craftsmanship and sophisticated agriculture, mainly produces barley, vegetables, and dates. The Persian dignitaries understand that prosperity depends on crops, irrigated by a skillful system of canals, maintained since Mesopotamian times. The empire ensures a stable climate through military presence and effective administration. Akkadian gradually recedes in favor of Aramaic and Persian in administration, although temples and certain archives still use it. The priests, aware of their influence, enjoy privileges with governors. Cyrus's religious approach, marked by tolerance, protects the great Babylonian cults. The New Year's ceremonies at Esagil persist under imperial benevolence. The new Persian order relies on the cooperation of religious elites, affirming a conquest respectful of traditions. Militarily, the Persian garrison around the city embodies Achaemenid authority. The soldiers from various regions live daily with the population. They discover local agriculture and craftsmanship, while the Babylonians observe their techniques and discipline. This proximity fosters cultural exchanges based on mutual curiosity. In some neighborhoods, linguistic diversity develops, with Aramaic often serving as the lingua franca between Persians and inhabitants. Taxation, the financial base of Achaemenid authority, relies on the agricultural abundance of the Mesopotamian plain. The Persians respect the traditional organization of tax collection. Babylonian officials account for quantities of barley, oil, or derived products, then inform Persian administrators who distribute the levies to other imperial cities. This rigorous system, supported by controlled administrative networking, favors efficiency over constraint. Cyrus and his successors thus maintained Babylon's prosperity while ensuring the relative loyalty of its notables. The anecdote that the Persian garrison received more dates than metal wages illustrates the local reality well. Dates, rich, easy to preserve, and abundant, constitute an essential resource. Rather than transporting silver or gold over long distances, the administration pays the troops with local commodities. The soldiers, accustomed to these conditions, willingly accept this form of payment as long as it guarantees their subsistence and minimal comfort. The year 539, before Christ, marks a major turning point for Mesopotamia with the advent of the Achaemenids under Cyrus II the Great. After the conquest of Babylon, the Persian Empire establishes its administration over the former land of the Neo-Babylonian kings, renamed the satrapy of Babiru. A satrapy is an administrative district entrusted to a satrap, a local governor, whose name means protector of the kingdom. This new status profoundly influences the economic, political, and cultural organization of the region. The Persian kings seek to preserve certain local structures while unifying practices and implementing their reforms. Among the major innovations is a network of royal roads connecting Babylon to Susa, the Persian capital located in present-day southwestern Iran. These roads, linked to Persepolis, Pasargadae, Ecbatana, or Sardis, allow rapid movement of armies, tribute, and imperial orders, thanks to relays and supply stations. According to Herodotus, this logistical system ensures the stability of central power and control over territories. Mesopotamia, at the crossroads of the East for millennia, remains a key space for exchanges, hosting goods, officials, and artisans. The Achaemenids thus maintain a relative order despite linguistic and religious diversity. The standardization of silver currency is another decisive aspect. Previously, the region used silver by weight in the form of ingots or jewelry, with a complex system of equivalences. The Achaemenids mint silver coins, notably under Darius I, simplifying exchanges. A unified currency strengthens fiscal policy, secures commerce, and asserts imperial authority over an empire stretching from Egypt to India. Babylonian, Phoenician, Aramean, or Persian merchants now have a stable reference, consolidating Babylon as a regional business center. This progress is accompanied by the spread of Aramaic, the administrative and commercial language promoted by Achaemenid bureaucrats. However, traditional practices endure in temples and certain cuneiform contracts in Akkadian, while other new practices take hold. The Persian power is also reflected in the archives and places of worship. At Uruk or Babylon, the sanctuaries continue to welcome offerings and manage lands, while respecting the Achaemenid taxation. Marduk, Ishtar, or Anu are worshipped there, but the Persian influence is manifested in the bureaucratic organization. The Temple of Eanna in Uruk remains venerated, with priests and scribes now using Aramaic for administration. The archives preserve receipts and contracts in this more flexible Semitic language than cuneiform, reflecting a growing bilingualism. The authorities recognize Aramaic as a vector of union, while respecting scribe traditions. Thus, in the archives, cuneiform tablets of offerings coexist with papyri or ostraca in Aramaic, related to daily management. This multiple usage reflects the coexistence between the millennial Mesopotamian culture and Persian administrative methods. This gradual transition from a local system to integration within the Achaemenid Empire is also reflected in tax collection. The Persians, wishing for regular tribute, rely on existing structures, but impose a simplified nomenclature in Aramaic to facilitate the circulation of information. Each satrapy contributes to military maintenance and the royal treasury. Babylon, with its fertile lands and active trade, supplies grains, dates, livestock, and metal silver in the form of ingots or coins. In exchange, the Persian power protects trade routes and invests in infrastructures promoting resource flow. The royal roads become commercial arteries, where caravans and boats transport agricultural and artisanal products. New centers for stone cutting, weaving, and pottery emerge, blending Persian influences and Mesopotamian traditions. The former Babylonian scribes observed this mixing of ideas, which opened society to external influences. The anecdote of the Eanna Temple illustrates this linguistic and administrative openness. Aramaic receipts there justified the payment of levies or rations for the sanctuary staff. The scribes used a language accessible to Persian officials and non-Babylonian collaborators, reinforcing Aramaic as a diplomatic and commercial language. Yet the cuneiform tradition is not abandoned. The Eanna tablets also preserve many acts in Akkadian, notably for sacred ceremonies and significant donations. This linguistic coexistence reflects the Achaemenid flexibility, preferring to integrate local traditions rather than eradicate them. These bilingual documents facilitate exchanges with Persian troops, Phoenician or Judean merchants, and Mesopotamian bureaucrats. This scriptural duality links populations and the new elite, while ensuring the continuity of the cults. As the satrapy of Babiru consolidates, Babylon retains a privileged status. A cultural and religious center for centuries, the city benefits from the attention of the Achaemenid kings. Under Cyrus, Cambyses, and Darius, fortifications are maintained and rights to Marduk continued. Merchants use a unified currency, facilitating trade towards the Mediterranean and India. Aramaic is everywhere a practical language, while Akkadian cuneiform perpetuates knowledge. Canals irrigate and support agriculture, maintaining local prosperity. Babylon is no longer an independent capital, but remains an essential pillar of Persian administration. Scribes compile documents reflecting the fusion of heritages. Thus, the Achaemenid period creates a multicultural universe where trade, religion, and knowledge interlace without breaking Mesopotamia's continuity. Between 522 and 482. Before Christ, Babylon was the scene of several uprisings testing Persian authority. After the victory of Cyrus the Great and the integration of Mesopotamia into the Achaemenid Empire, the Babylonians sometimes resisted foreign domination, carried by the pride of their Neo-Babylonian past, marked by kings like Nabopolassar and Nebuchadnezzar II. Upon the death of Cyrus in 530, and then his son Cambyses II in 522, the succession to the Persian throne favored dissent. Darius III, once in power, re-established strict order to consolidate the empire, but in Babylon, several attempts aimed to reject this tutelage. These revolts often relied on the Neo-Babylonian royal memory, with some pretenders usurping the names or titles of former kings to legitimize their cause. During the first revolt, an unknown individual declared himself Nabonidus III, taking the name of the last independent king, Nabonidus, who was overthrown by Cyrus. This name carried a strong symbolic charge, recalling the past Babylonian monarchy. The Persian archives, notably Darius's inscription at Behistun, report that the ruler sent his army to quell the rebellion, capturing and executing this false king. Shortly after, another rebel, Bel-Shimani, proclaimed himself king. His name referred to the god Marduk, the city's main protector and of the royal dynasty, whose clergy had sometimes supported Persian power. Hoping to rally the population through religion and political frustration, Belshazzar attempted to form an urban militia. But lacking financial and religious support, his reign was brief. Darius intervened again, severely suppressing the rebellion and inflicting reprisals. Darius the First recounts in his inscriptions his victorious campaigns against these uprisings, notably highlighting the partial destruction of Babylon's fortifications, a strong symbol of the imposed submission. Despite this, he maintained a policy of compromise by preserving the temples, especially Esagil, the major sanctuary dedicated to Marduk. This strategy aimed to ensure religious stability and civil peace. Babylon thus remained an important economic and administrative center, even though several influential families lost their privileges and the city had to pay tributes. The revolts continued until the time of Xerxes III, son of Darius, who also had to face troubles. Cuneiform tablets preserved in various museums document the economic activity despite the repression, agricultural exchanges, livestock trade, and manufactured goods, with Babylon remaining a relay between Mesopotamia and the Eastern Empire. However, the imprint of the repression was visible, with exiles, the weakening of the local aristocracy, and reinforced military control. Cultural control and imperial propaganda manifested in unprecedented ways. The Persians nominally respected local deities, but their carvings and inscriptions portrayed an image of invincible conquerors. An anecdote reports the discovery of a Persian graffiti on a wall of an important building, depicting a Persian archer in a pleated tunic, rounded cap, and curved bow, aiming at a winged dragon. In the eyes of Babylonians, this dragon could symbolize the god Marduk, often represented by the creature Mushushu. The image suggested that the archer, representing the Achaemenid king, was annihilating the tutelary power of Babylon, asserting that the Persian Empire had defeated the city's protective gods, or at least that their worship could no longer defend it against the imperial army. Babylonia, far from being isolated, was a millennia-old center playing a major political role, with a rich cultural heritage, monumental architecture, literary traditions, cuneiform, astronomical treaties, chronicles, and trade networks covering Mesopotamia. Despite this, the Achaemenid Empire dominated thanks to its efficient administration and powerful army, quickly suppressing any rebellion. The Babylonians, aware of belonging to a vast empire extending from Asia Minor to the Indus, had to deal with a central power attentive to retaining this precious province. The revolts between 522 and 482 before Christ allowed some Babylonians to consider themselves heirs of a sovereign kingdom. Rebel leaders attempted to rally notables nostalgic for the former Neo-Babylonian Empire and take advantage of tensions related to tax pressure while seeking an alliance with other discontented provinces. However, repeated interventions by the Persian army prevented any large-scale coordination, and the insurgents were generally defeated. The rapidity of the repression was facilitated by Cyrus II's integration policy, which had maintained relative religious autonomy to diffuse revolts. Darius, then Xerxes, inherited a well-established administration, limiting the mobilization of the clergy and local elites. Babylonian sources mention reprisals. Some influential families connected to the clergy or the former court had their lands confiscated, while others, favorable to the Persians, received commercial or land privileges. New garrisons were installed in Babylon and the rural districts to prevent future uprisings. The tablets from Uruk also show the progression of Aramaic, the imperial official language, which was simpler than Akkadian, reflecting Persian control and the desire to standardize administration over a multilingual territory. Babylonians had to coexist with their millennia-old cuneiform heritage and this new reality. Darius I, who reigned until 486 before Christ, left a vast and organized empire to Xerxes. The Babylonian revolts, although suppressed, continued sporadically. At the beginning of Xerxes' reign, Babylon was again shaken by uprisings, attested by Greek and cuneiform sources. These repetitive failures show the impossibility of restoring a strong Babylonian state under Achaemenid domination. The Persian military organization, reinforced by a network of roads and relays, allowed rapid troop movement and affirmed the political presence of the sovereign. The satraps and royal agents received extended powers, supervising city-states and judicial decisions, thus excluding any large-scale conspiracy. Any assembly was promptly suppressed by massive intervention. Persian graffiti illustrates an aspect of Achaemenid domination, a simple and powerful iconography marking the conquered space. An archer drawing his bow, facing a dragon or a winged monster, symbolizes the defeat of Babylon and the loss of the divine protection of Marduk. These representations served as psychological propaganda aimed at discouraging any revolt by presenting the Persian victory as a political and sacred fact. Darius I, keen to preserve local prosperity, avoided the total destruction of Babylon. Fiscal archives show that the city continued to pay taxes and provide goods, and that irrigation canals, essential for agriculture in Mesopotamia, were maintained. The empire preferred a productive province to a field of ruins, but the repeated revolts demonstrated that Babylonian loyalty remained uncertain. In response, the Persians reinforced their garrisons and centralized administration, appointing officers to supervise lands and collect taxes. The phrase of Darius the Thurston, "Baburish destroyed, its walls razed," announced the end of local independence. Despite the persistence of Babylonian culture in religious and scholarly fields, these unsuccessful revolts marked a turning point. The elites understood that cooperating with the satraps was the only way to preserve their property and temples. The Achaemenid Empire imposed itself as an heir capable of managing the political and religious aspects of the subjugated peoples. Historians still debate the extent of the destructions, but recognize that the pride of Babylon was deeply shaken. Over the decades, the contrast between Babylon's past grandeur and its condition as a dominated province became more pronounced. The myth of an invincible Babylon no longer mobilized the masses against the Achaemenid Empire. However, the cuneiform chronicles bear witness to the courage of factions defending a now absent ruler. The weakness of the revolts and their suppression reinforced the belief that Babylon's destiny was tied to Persian power. Subsequent generations had to adapt, as Babylonian identity faded in favor of Achaemenid structures. The graffiti of the archer piercing a dragon remains a strong symbol of this failure in the Persian domination of Mesopotamia. At the beginning of the 4th century before Christ, Mesopotamia remained under the rule of Achaemenid kings, heirs of the Persian Empire founded by Cyrus II the Great. Their power extended from the Near East to Egypt and to the borders of India. Babylon, once the heart of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, retained a major cultural and architectural aura, even if several works remained unfinished and other Persian centers undermined its dominance. In 331 before Christ, Alexander, son of Philip II, altered the region's geopolitics with his military rapidity, marking a decisive turning point in the history of Babylon. Already master of Asia Minor, Phoenicia, and Egypt, Alexander seeks to defeat Darius III. During the Battle of Gaugamela, east of the Tigris, near Arbela, he deals a decisive blow to the Achaemenid armies, thanks to the tactical superiority of the phalanx reinforced by cavalry. Darius III flees, leaving his empire under Macedonian threat. Babylon then becomes a strategic objective. Alexander enters it without strong resistance, welcomed by a population weary of Persian rule. Fascinated by its walls, temples, and gardens, he presents himself as a sovereign protector of Mesopotamian culture, ready to complete the unfinished constructions dedicated to Marduk. For the Babylonians, he embodies an alternative to the often distant Achaemenid administration, despite the preservation of local elites. Alexander promises to restore the city to its former glory, while adhering to a religious continuity. Through his sacrifices at the Temple of Esagil and support for the restoration of the ziggurat, he legitimizes his power among a population attached to its millennial traditions. The beginnings of the Macedonian presence are characterized by cultural effervescence. Alexander's court attracts merchants, craftsmen, scholars, doctors, and Greek artists. The Greco-Macedonian elite alters local balances. The Persian administration is dismantled in favor of a Greek model, although some Babylonian officials remain to ensure a smooth transition. The former Achaemenid bureaucracy adapts to the conqueror's demands, who encourages the founding of new cities according to Hellenic urbanism. A key moment is the founding of Seleucia on the Tigris. Despite debates about its precise date, this metropolis aims to control the river routes to Babylonia and the Persian Gulf. Named in honor of General Seleucus, future heir of a large part of the empire, Seleucia quickly becomes a center of Greek influence, with colonnades, theaters, and gymnasiums, attracting Macedonian settlers into administration and commerce. Babylon begins a gradual decline. Despite some revitalization attempts, the city gradually loses its central administrative role. The route of trade paths now favors the new city of Seleucia, which is more recent and closer to the Tigris. Babylon retains legendary prestige and remains vibrant for several generations, but its walls and sacred buildings mainly become a memory of past glory. This decline, initiated by Persian administrative reforms, is accelerated by the transfer of the regional center to Seleucia, decided by Alexander. Hellenic influence is manifested in both urban planning and art and iconography. The Greeks, marked by their religious and artistic tradition, seek to merge their deities with those of conquered peoples to promote cultural acceptance. In Babylon, the ancient Mesopotamian pantheon, with Marduk, Ishtar, or Nabu, is paralleled with Greek deities. Sculptors invent hybrid statues, mixing Greek canons, contrapposto, fluid draperies, idealized figures, with Mesopotamian elements like conical headdresses or stylized beards. Some ancient travelers mention statues described as Zeus Bel, where Zeus's eagle is associated with the symbols of Bel Marduk. Frescoes and mosaics also reflect this syncretism. Greek myths sometimes intertwine with local legends about Nergal and the underworld. In the palaces of Alexander and his successors, reliefs mix scenes of Greek conquest with Mesopotamian cult scenes inherited from Babylon. Athenian pottery, adorned with hoplite warriors, is found alongside Babylonian bronze ritual utensils. On the religious front, Alexander does not settle for imposing himself as a conqueror. He seeks to integrate into local beliefs. He likely consulted the city's oracle and Babylonian priests to obtain divine approval. Offerings at the Temple of Esagil and maintenance of the ziggurat dedicated to Marduk are part of his strategy to be recognized as the guardian of cosmic order. In the Mesopotamian tradition, the sovereign must maintain universal harmony, a concept close to Alexander's vision, who considers himself the legitimate universal king. Yet Alexander remains above all a conqueror. The Babylonian scribes have an ambivalent view. Some celebrate him as a liberating hero who ends the Persian tutelage, while others blame him for the degradation of Babylon's status. The redirection of trade flows towards Seleucia, and the political instability caused by his distant campaigns, which mobilized soldiers and resources. The annals kept by priest astronomers describe his arrival as the beginning of a new era full of promises, but also upheavals. These changes are accompanied by an influx of foreigners. Alongside the Macedonians, many Greeks from Asia Minor arrive, attracted by career or profit opportunities. In Babylon's streets, one increasingly hears the Greek language, Attic dialect, or other Hellenic forms. The markets, where Babylonians, Arabs, Persians, and Greeks intersect, exchange olive oil, wine, and Aegean ceramics for dates, grains, and finely embroidered Mesopotamian fabrics. The local temples, under a clergy accustomed to multiculturalism, integrate Greek rituals or authorize various celebrations to appease local populations and new arrivals. This cultural mix fosters the emergence of new philosophical and scientific currents. The Babylonians, already passionate about astronomy, discover Greek speculations in cosmology and geometry. The libraries, previously centered on cuneiform texts, receive scrolls in Greek. Some Babylonian scholars study Euclidean geometry or Hippocratic medicine, while Greek philosophers take an interest in Mesopotamian knowledge such as astrology, haruspicy, or the calculation of ephemerides. After Alexander, this dynamic continues under the Seleucids, who exploit the economic and intellectual resources of the region to consolidate their power. These transformations do not occur without tensions. Traditional elites, notably the great priestly families, mix hope and fear. They appreciate Alexander's support for restoration projects and the Esagil temple, but dread the introduction of foreign ideas that could disrupt the established order. Conflicts sometimes arise within the sanctuary regarding the naming of deities or the integration of Greco-Babylonian statues. Some ceremonies, previously reserved for local priests, now welcome Greek representatives who do not master the language. Thus, despite their intact pride, Babylonians see their influence wane in the face of new masters. Babylon experiences a paradox. Honored by Alexander, it is also marginalized by the creation of a competing metropolis on the Tigris. The conqueror wishes to make the region a commercial and military center for his campaigns towards the Far East. Preferring Susa and Persepolis, then Central Asia, he neglects Babylon, which suffers an economic decline due to the departure of Macedonian soldiers and the absence of an active court. This ambivalence is evident in the Babylonian archives. Some tablets preserve tradition by calling Alexander the Great King, a symbol of Achaemenid imperial legitimacy. Others adopt innovation by naming him Shar-Kisati, King of the Universe, or of the World, a prestigious title laden with irony given the destructions caused by his conquest. This title also implies the responsibility to maintain order in the conquered territories. A famous anecdote recounts that a Babylonian scribe, whose name is lost, praises Alexander as Shar-Kisati, capable of uniting Greece, Persia, Egypt, and Babylonia under one authority. But he also mentions the desolation of districts and the partial burning of the summer palace, consequences of armies on the march. In the eyes of the Babylonians, Alexander is a civilizing hero and an involuntary destroyer, a cultural bridge, and a strategist focused on new horizons. This ambivalence characterizes Alexander's soft conquest, the promise of a new splendor for Babylon, while shifting its political and administrative future towards Seleucia. Under the influence of the Macedonian soldiers and Greek settlers, the ancient city witnesses the emergence of new practices. Some Babylonians adopt Greek gymnastics, while Macedonian officers admire symbols of Mesopotamian royalty, such as the bas-reliefs of winged bulls or statues of lions. This coexistence fosters both innovations and tensions. On one hand, the richness of a millennia-old Babylonian written tradition. On the other, the strength of a Greek civilization proud of its military and philosophical heritage. Had Alexander had the time to establish his capital in Babylon, he might have realized an empire uniting the East and the West. But the city, barely recovering from its overhaul, must already contend with new territorial reconfigurations. The remnants reveal the emergence of a hybrid art. In some staterooms, wall decorations combine Greek motifs, meanders, palmettes, friezes of winged deities, and glazed Babylonian bricks. Steles show Alexander triumphant, with Macedonian spear and helmet, facing a priest dressed like the god Nabu. The inscriptions, sometimes in Greek, sometimes in cuneiform, testify to the hesitant coexistence of two writing systems. Some scholars even undertake bilingual lexicons to facilitate the transition between Greek and Akkadian. Babylon remains a spiritual metropolis, welcoming travelers, merchants, and diplomats, but the administrative dynamics shift towards Seleucia. Documents from the post-conquest period show that taxes on goods between the north and south of Mesopotamia are centralized in Seleucia. This centralization attracts capital and merchants who abandon Babylon. Offerings in the temples decrease, and priests have to manage with reduced budgets, despite occasional contributions from Alexander or his subordinates during religious festivals or propaganda actions. Nevertheless, the Babylonian heritage does not disappear. It permeates the collective unconscious, reappears in official ceremonies, and influences the Greek perception of the territory. The statues of Zeus Bel symbolize this artistic fusion and Alexander's desire to preserve Babylonian religious pride while superimposing the reference to Zeus, the major Greek deity. This syncretism aims to harmonize beliefs and prevent revolts, even if Babylonian tradition sometimes resists this adaptation. The testimony of a Babylonian scribe who calls Alexander Shar-Kisati, king of the world, is particularly revealing. It celebrates the cosmic dimension of the Macedonian reign, while noting the degradation of neighborhoods, plundering of food supplies, and partial destruction of official buildings. This passage illustrates the contradictions of the era, an extraordinary power that prioritizes military ambitions at the expense of protecting and restoring the city. In the 3rd century before Christ, Mesopotamia undergoes a transitional period under the domination of the Seleucid Empire, the Greek heir of Alexander the Great. Established in key cities like Seleucia on the Tigris near Babylon, the Seleucids spread Hellenic culture, which gradually modifies the local society. The elites adopt Greek for commerce, administration, and culture. relegating Akkadian, once the dominant language, to the background, especially in the religious sphere. Official acts are now often written in Greek, and the old cuneiform texts are gradually replaced by simpler formats. Temples, once spiritual and economic centers, gradually become financial institutions. They own land estates, grant loans, store harvests, and receive deposits. This function amplifies with the rising power of Greek and Hellenized merchants who use temples as guarantees and credit places. Interest rates are negotiated within a broader framework inspired by the practices of Asia Minor. The accumulated wealth attracts new economic pilgrims who come to negotiate goods rather than perform rites. The guardians of the cult sometimes sell or trade sacred manuscripts, sometimes inscribed in cuneiform, which become precious objects, collected or worn as amulets, supposed to protect through their mystery and connection to Babylon. In the 2nd century before Christ, the Parthian Empire, originating from the northeastern part of Iran, extended its domination over Mesopotamia, gradually replacing the Seleucids. Under kings like Mithridates III, the region was integrated into an empire blending Persian, Hellenistic, and local traditions. Parthian became the administrative language, while Aramaic, well suited for commerce, was encouraged in the central provinces. Greek persisted in certain cities influenced by Seleucid culture, but Akkadian was relegated to being a legacy known only to a few priests and scribes. Temples retained their religious place, but their financial role was further amplified under the Parthians, who encouraged this economic management. The priests managed accounts, collected revenues, taxed caravans, and kept records. Sometimes, to facilitate archiving, some contracts were copied onto Greek materials like papyrus imported from Egypt. The Babylonian scholars saw this as a threat to their traditions, but adapted to commercial needs. Furthermore, cuneiform manuscripts, religious or literary, were sometimes sold for their rarity or supposed magical virtues, often transformed into talismans, relegating their spiritual content to the background in favor of their market value. The transformations of the period are illustrated by a loan at interest, documented in the archives of a temple and then recopied onto Greek papyrus. A Mesopotamian trader requested a sum to expand his business from a temple located south of Babylon, whose priests controlled stocks of cereals and precious metals. The scribes drafted a detailed cuneiform contract with interest rates, duration, and guarantees. Later, for Seleucid or Parthian jurisdiction, this contract was recopied in Greek, the common administrative language, illustrating the linguistic coexistence of the time. Cuneiform tablet for Babylonian scribes, Greek papyrus for the administration. This evolution went beyond the economy. Greek scholars introduced new philosophical currents, while Mesopotamian schools, once flourishing, declined. Some Babylonian masters tried to have their ancient knowledge recognized at the court of Seleucid or Parthian kings, where prophecies and astrology remained important. But Greek competition was fierce, and Akkadian lost its prestige. Learning cuneiform became long and little useful, limiting the careers of scribes. Only a few enthusiasts still study the ancient texts to understand forgotten rites or omens, but their influence remained weak. Meanwhile, the Parthian Empire consolidated its power, overshadowing the Seleucids, especially after border conflicts. Towards the end of the 2nd and into the 1st century before Christ, the Parthians established their capital at Ctesiphon on the Tigris, while Babylon declined. Parthian and Aramaic became official languages. Greek remained common among some elites. The use of cuneiform waned, only a few Babylonian priests still taught it to hand-pick students. Writing materials evolved, favoring stone, wax, and papyrus over engraved clay. Trade exchanges also transformed. Under Babylonians and Greeks, cereal production and the export of dates to the west were central. With the Parthians, sought-after goods now included products from Central Asia. Caravans traversed mountains and fortified stations where Aramaic, Greek, and Parthian mingled, accentuating the decline of Akkadian. Commercial records dealt with new realities, such as the sale of Persian luxury items or the hiring of distant mercenaries. Sometimes, fragments of ancient tablets circulated as exotic objects, their historical value overshadowed by their supposed magical aura. Merchants did not hesitate to exaggerate their powers to sell them better. Over generations, society grew accustomed to hearing Greek in agoras and amphitheaters and signing contracts according to Greek or Parthian formulas. Sacred ceremonies, once based on a Mesopotamian lunar calendar, adapted to Hellenistic festivals or the demands of new powers. Some sanctuaries retained a Babylonian cult mixed with Greek or Iranian elements. The priests, often in debt, transformed their temples into exchange places, exploiting their aura to attract wealth. Libraries kept cuneiform tablets, often unreadable today, whose preservation was uncertain. Some were even sold to speculators charmed by their supposed supernatural allure. In cultivated classes, the decline of Akkadian is evident in the rarity of official inscriptions. Where once a ruler commissioned long stelae and carefully crafted cuneiform, there now appear Parthian or Greek reliefs with bilingual inscriptions without Akkadian. To consult old administrative texts, one calls upon veteran scribes, rare, capable of deciphering the ancient script. Parthian kings tolerate diverse traditions, but favor a standardized administration, often in Greek or Aramaic. Aramaic gains prominence among notables, being simpler and quicker to learn than Akkadian, facilitating trade with Syrian and Phoenician regions. In daily life, some Babylonian customs gradually fade, even in markets and shops. Account books, once on clay tablets, sometimes appear as Greek or Aramaic lists on papyrus, lighter and easier to archive. The clergy of the great sanctuaries of Marduk or Nabu follows this trend, seeking to make their archives accessible and to handle current affairs swiftly. Maintaining vast libraries of tablets remains a logistical challenge, especially in less well-maintained buildings. Hellenized priests, to attract patrons, often favor Greco-Oriental aesthetics for buildings rather than the upkeep of archive rooms. When cuneiform manuscripts accumulate, some are sold to merchants who turn them into relics of a declining golden age, presented as mysterious talismans. In this context of rapid change, commercial, diplomatic, and cultural ties are reoriented around new axes where Babylon loses its central role. The Seleucids and then the Parthians cultivate partnerships with Ptolemaic Egypt, Bactria, or the Arabian Peninsula, introducing new influences mixed with ancient traditions into Mesopotamia. The Greek language asserts itself, followed by Parthian and Aramaic, while Akkadian survives mainly in a few antique rituals or esoteric texts that are not understood. Philosophers or scholars evoke the past grandeur of Babylon and the prestige of its astrological knowledge, but this is not enough to preserve the daily use of Akkadian. The anecdote of interest-bearing loans, preserved on a tablet and then recopied in Greek, illustrates this rapid adaptation well. Both mediums tell the same story. an indebted individual solicits the temple, deposits a guarantee, and commits to repay by a specific date with interest. This shift from clay to papyrus symbolizes the transition from a world governed by ancient traditions to a new legal system aligned with Seleucid and then Parthian power, adapted to a more mobile society open to the Mediterranean and Iran. In a few generations, this linguistic and intellectual change undermines the foundations of Mesopotamian culture and shifts the region into another era. The tablets persist, but their deep meaning escapes most inhabitants, while Greek, Aramaic, and Parthian dominate urban life. Towards the end of the Neo-Babylonian age, the balances that had allowed Mesopotamia to prosper began to break down. For a long time, the Euphrates had been channeled to irrigate arid lands. This area between the Euphrates and the Tigris, dubbed the Fertile Crescent, benefited from an elaborate network of canals, dikes, and rudimentary dams. But in the last centuries before Christi, the course of the Euphrates gradually deviated, complicating the supply of fresh water. The silting up of hydraulic infrastructures directly affected agriculture, livestock, and the health of rural populations. The powerful cities of the plain, which had built their wealth on this system, suffered structural weakening. The maintenance of canals required a large workforce, often requisitioned by royal power or temples. As long as central power was strong, these works were regular. But with political weakening and changes in dynasties, repairs became rarer, making the structures less reliable. Cuneiform archives report complaints from farmers facing fields that are too dry or flooded. The shifts in the Euphrates riverbed worsened the situation. The former channels moved away from the new path of the river, deprived of water. Engineers had to design complex diversion systems, dig new canals, relocate villages, or improvise rudimentary pumps to reclaim the water. But these efforts were costly in a context of weakened sovereignty and the difficult mobilization of populations. Silting was another major scourge. The soil, rich in silt, became unstable. Without maintenance, the canals filled with sediments, exacerbated by seasonal winds and floods. Some secondary structures, like the Nar Kabari Canal, were particularly weakened. Administrative archives increasingly mention essential cleaning works to maintain navigation or irrigation. Those who could not keep up with these efforts left, exacerbating rural depopulation. In stagnant water areas, a new threat spread: malaria. Although the mosquito vectors were not known, the relationship between stagnant waters and severe fevers was observed. Physicians often attributed these fevers to the wrath of river gods or a curse. Sacrifices and rituals were multiplied to implore healing, while the degradation of the canals made sanitary struggle difficult. The problem affected both rural areas and cities, which depended on rural products. Commercial archives show an increase in the prices of foodstuffs such as barley, a consequence of reduced harvests related to water shortages, soil degradation, and epidemics affecting the workforce. In some towns, farmers abandoned their land, weary of taxes and precariousness. This exodus headed towards large cities or higher regions where the climate reduced health risks. The plateaus to the east and north of the Tigris Valley seemed more promising. There, the learning of new agricultural techniques, adapted to more stable rainfall, attracted farmers who could reach them. The mountainous populations of the Zagros foothills had long lived with diverse resources: livestock, honey, small verdures naturally irrigated. Despite competition for land, they partially escaped malaria. However, this evolution favored the flight of talent and workers from the plain, weakening the maintenance of the Mesopotamian hydraulic network. Many administrative tablets show farmers asking for permission to move to more fertile or safer lands, sometimes through contracts negotiated with local lords, sometimes by voluntary escape. The servile workforce, once enlisted for major hydraulic works, was abandoned. The temples, once economic pillars, lost taxes and their influence. The few active canal projects were situated around still prosperous centers, often linked to imperial administration or deriving income from long-distance trade. Garrisons, under Persian or Seleucid authorities, prioritized water supply for their troops, but this attention was strategic and military, not focused on peasantry. As soon as the political situation deteriorated, support for civilian infrastructures fell, accelerating their degradation. The last known mention of a secondary canal, the Nahr Kabari, reports its progressive silting. This diversion of the Euphrates, intended to irrigate a zone of lower Mesopotamia, was still cleaned by workers, but without success due to lack of manpower, time, and money. The worker brigades could no longer maintain its state. A tablet associated with the Nahr Kabari describes bitter water, dead fish. This document, found in an administrative bureau, signals brackish water due to salt seepage, a phenomenon threatening poorly drained soils. The fish died in these stagnant areas. Written at the end of Achaemenid domination, or at the beginning of the Hellenistic period, this tablet also mentions the departure of several downstream villages deserted by farmers and scribes. When the water becomes unusable, economic activity plummets. Potters and herders must move. Farmers, deprived of fresh water, are forced into nomadism or exile to better irrigated regions. This observation symbolizes the local ecological catastrophe and the critical situation of communities in the Mesopotamian plain. Malaria was worsening, with stagnant water becoming unhealthy and promoting the proliferation of mosquitoes. The bitterness reported by the tablet also evokes organic pollution related to the accumulation of waste in the canals. The disease weakened a social organization already shaken by rural exodus. Some chronicles report that priests organized rituals to purify the waters, but without concrete success. The deterioration of the canals was too advanced to be countered by incantations. Climatic hazards weakened the system. Some areas of Mesopotamia experienced longer or more intense droughts. Slight variations in rainfall had severe consequences when all survival depended on irrigation. The floods of the Euphrates and the Tigris, vital for recharging the networks, were either too weak or too violent, damaging the banks. Without a central authority to manage the water, like in Assyrian or Babylonian times, the hydraulic balance quickly broke. Local lords taxed the population to finance works, but without global coordination, each isolated effort lost effectiveness. Regional trade suffered. The navigable routes connecting the cities were silting up or becoming too salty and shallow. Shipments were stuck upstream because land transport was costly over long distances. Some merchants chose other routes, further north or through the Gulf, which reduced local prosperity. Cities dependent on commercial transit felt this decline strongly. Only a few areas where the canals were still maintained or benefiting from favorable geography remained functional. These enclaves attracted the rural population, saturating the available lands. Conflicts often broke out around these water points, opposing peasants, townspeople, and garrisons, exacerbating social instability. More unrest led to less maintenance, and thus the gradual abandonment of the canals. Fauna and flora reflected this decline. The fish of the Euphrates, like certain carp, suffered in an oxygen-poor and too salty environment. Fishing, once an important resource, was becoming scarce. Palm groves, sensitive to lack of irrigation, withered, affecting the production of dates, essential to subsistence and trade. This picture contrasted with earlier descriptions of a lush and prosperous plain. Late cuneiform documents, like the final tablet of Nar-Kabari, testify to this disenchantment. The expression bitter water is often used to describe undrinkable water, tainted by salt. This dramatic realization reveals that no prosperity is possible without healthy water in these scorching plains. Never before had the canal network been so close to total abandonment. The inability to combat sediment, the absence of a clear hydraulic policy, and the changing climate destabilized a society already weakened by conflicts, revolts, and invasions. In this context, rural exodus to the highlands or foreign lands often seemed the only way out. Cuneiform archives became scarce as the scribal population dwindled. The Mesopotamian environment, the cradle of great civilizations, sank into an ecological and economic crisis, from which it never really recovered. The Nar-Kabari Canal, from a living irrigation artery to a basin of stagnant waters with dead fish floating, symbolizes this profound rupture. At the beginning of the 1st century before Christ, cuneiform writing, once flourishing in Mesopotamia, began a noticeable decline spanning several generations. Inherited from the Sumerians, then adopted by the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians, this complex script accompanied the rise of great cities like Uruk, Babylon, and Nineveh. But Persian conquests, the arrival of Alexander the Great, and Seleucid then Parthian domination, introduced new languages and simpler scripts, better suited to administrative needs. Between the 1st century before Christ and CE, cuneiform was limited to temples and scholarly circles, signaling its imminent disappearance from official archives and daily life. Uruk, one of the oldest metropolises, remains the ultimate guardian of this scriptural heritage. Once the cradle of prosperous religious institutions, it retains a symbolic role under foreign dynasties. In its temples, a few scribe schools still transmit cuneiform writing on clay tablets engraved with reed styluses for sacred texts, rituals, and economic archives. But outside these circles, Aramaic, with its flexible alphabet, dominates the commercial and administrative scene, restricting cuneiform to a few specialists. Access to this writing becomes increasingly limited. The decline of cuneiform is not only explained by its complexity. Since the Achaemenids, Aramaic has become the lingua franca of the Near East, facilitating imperial management and commercial exchanges. Its alphabet of about 20 letters is far more accessible than the thousands of cuneiform signs. In the 1st century before Christ, the Parthian conquest reinforced these trends. Akkadian is no longer the language of the rising elites, and Syriac, derived from Aramaic, imposes itself in religious circles. Cuneiform then becomes an appanage restricted to scholars attached to the cultic traditions of Babylonia, perceived as a relic of the past. Despite this decline, some priestly circles strive to preserve this literary heritage. In Uruk, the scribe student still practices tracing hundreds of signs, distinguishing phonetic, logographic, and determinative values. Ancient hymns dedicated to Marduk, Anu, or Ishtar are recited, relying on millennia-old tablets. But the production of new inscriptions is rare. Most documents are copies preserved out of respect for tradition. In the 1st century CE, under Parthian and Roman rule, these scholars formed nothing more than an isolated circle in the Mesopotamian plain, where the prestige of scholarship gave way to indifference. The most striking testimony of this imminent extinction comes from a tablet found in Uruk, dated to the year 75. Although its exact content is difficult to determine, it is likely a brief administrative text related to a local temple. This discovery symbolizes the last attested activity of a scribe still mastering the cuneiform culture. Over time, this document has become a chronological milestone, attesting that after this date, no more tablets were written or officially dated. Ironically, this place that had witnessed the birth of the first Sumerian writing attempts also hosted the very last glimmer of this system before its extinction. This paradox illustrates the intertwining of past and present in a city. While few tablets have reached us from this final phase, some indirect testimonies evoke the solitude of the last scribes. An anonymous scribe from Uruk supposedly wrote on a fragmentary tablet, "No one after me will be able to read this." This note expresses the awareness of belonging to a tradition already deemed archaic. The great empires now favored Aramaic and then Syriac, and no longer funded the training needed for cuneiform. The sound of the reed engraving clay was fading away, taking with it whole swathes of millennia-old knowledge. Thus, a Mesopotamian scriptural chapter was closed. The Aramaic and Syriac alphabets offered a more immediate alternative for transmitting and preserving information. In a Middle East crossed by caravan routes linking the Mediterranean to Asia, speed and clarity were essential. Aramaic, the administrative language under the Achaemenids, continued its progression in the Parthian Empire, while Syriac developed in emerging Christian communities. Merchant records, religious texts, and diplomatic correspondences circulated on parchment or papyrus, reducing the role of cuneiform. The rare monumental inscriptions in the ancient style aroused more curiosity than understanding, and the ancient writing was gradually perceived as a symbol of a bygone era. The scribes could not compete with the efficiency of these alphabetical systems. Paradoxically, this marginalization allowed certain cuneiform texts to survive, preserved in the basements of temples and abandoned buildings. The clay tablets, more durable than the papyrus sensitive to humidity, lay misunderstood in the darkness of the ruins. Only their religious value sometimes prompted priests to preserve these documents, seen as relics of ancient knowledge. Among them were astrological treaties, divinatory rites, and hymns to the Babylonian gods. By the 1st century, these pieces were already rare, with no contemporary copies to replace the worn-out tablets. Oblivion overcame the cuneiform tradition, sealing this writing in silence. In parallel, the progressive Christianization of the Near East favored the spread of Syriac as a liturgical language. Communities organized around new religious centers, often distant from the ancient Babylonian temples. Monastic schools, responsible for educating the clergy, favored alphabetic writing, with no interest in perpetuating an outdated system. The ziggurats lost their cultural role, and Mesopotamian knowledge was sometimes transcribed into modern alphabets, stripped of their nuances. The Parthian or Roman authorities no longer financed the training of cuneiform scribes. The few scholars still interested knew their efforts would no longer resonate. Transmission unraveled towards other horizons. The last officially dated cuneiform tablet, that of 75, marks the epilogue of an intellectual adventure of nearly 3 millennia. The schools of scribes, the literary wealth, and the accumulated knowledge sank into oblivion due to the lack of practitioners. While Aramaic and Syriac ensured written continuity, cuneiform sealed itself under the dust of centuries. Thousands of tablets remain buried beneath the ruins of Babylon, Nineveh, or Uruk, becoming mere mysteries for future generations. Mesopotamian scholars foresaw this disappearance, leaving the melancholic prediction, "No one after me will know how to read this." An echo of vanished empires. In the 3rd century Anno Domini, the Sassanid Empire controlled a vast Mesopotamian region, reorganizing power around Ctesiphon, southeast of ancient Babylon. Located on the eastern bank of the Tigris, this city quickly became the center of Sassanid government, seat of the imperial court, and a commercial hub. The Persian rulers, descendants of the dynasty founded by Ardashir I, consolidated their power with a hierarchical administration and a network of local alliances to pacify the region. They also unified the empire religiously by promoting Zoroastrianism as the state cult. Simultaneously, Nestorian Christianity took root in many Mesopotamian communities. Stemming from a doctrinal split, it emphasized the distinction between the divine and human nature of Jesus, a doctrine perceived as heretical by the Eastern Roman Empire. In the Sassanid Empire, this Christianity offered a spiritual alternative adapted to the local populations while avoiding tensions with Byzantium. Several churches and monasteries, often established on ancient temples, attest to this implantation. The rulers generally tolerated these communities, which contributed to the economic and social balance in this strategic region. By the 7th century, Ctesiphon attracted travelers, including Xuanzang, a Chinese Buddhist monk, who described immense ruins inhabited by stone spirits in his accounts. These ancient vestiges testified to past civilizations, while the Tigris continued to supply local agriculture. In 637, the Muslim conquest reached Mesopotamia, confronting the Sassanid Empire in decisive battles like the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah. Arab forces reorganized the territory, creating Kufa and then Baghdad, a future major intellectual center in the Abbasid era. Ctesiphon quickly lost its administrative role in the face of the rise of these new cities, gradually emptying. The victors altered the canals for their needs, abandoning other hydraulic works. The old irrigation systems fell into disuse, weakening the fertility of the basins. In the low plains around the Shatt al-Arab, marshes spread, engulfing villages and turning fields into inhospitable areas. Some villages may have disappeared under the waters, leaving a feeling of desolation. Over the centuries, the memory of these vanished cities mingles with traditions. The legend of al-Bini tells of the creation of a lake caused by the anger of a ghostly Babylonian king, striking the earth with a blow of his scepter. This myth reflects an attempt to explain these disappearances. Fishermen and pilots still speak of submerged edifices, witnesses to a grand and distant past.